Chapter 1501. Under the barrage of muskets, not a single cavalryman was able to get within 300 steps of the trenches. The battle lasted from day to night. In the end, the Khaganate army left behind about 12,000 corpses before retreating helplessly. On the other hand, the Cold Front army didn't suffer a single casualty. In fact, the marksmanship of the soldiers was even better. It was said that sharpshooters were trained by bullets, but that was only true for fixed targets. Occasionally, there would be moving targets. For example, a real target like this was something that even the sharpshooters of the future envied. In order to train the soldiers' marksmanship and take into account that the enemy's charge wasn't too loud, Commander Xiao Feng conducted actual combat training in units of battalions. Not only did this save bullets to a certain extent, it also preserved the soldiers' stamina to the greatest extent. They were surrounded on all sides and had only sent out 4 battalions of soldiers. In this kind of battlefield, they would have no problem holding out for a long time. Not to mention, before they were surrounded, they had brought 20 days' worth of rations. Unlike the Mongolian army, they had instant noodles, biscuits, ham sausages, canned food, and so on. Even if they didn't have a chance to start a fire, they could still eat until they were full. This was the best way to preserve their stamina and fighting spirit. Seeing that Cold Front's 2nd Regiment had killed more enemies than their entire regiment, the 1st Regiment's commander Min Fu and the 2nd Regiment's commander Lori were envious. They came up to Xiao Feng and asked sincerely, "General Xiao, our commander has sent a telegram saying that he's on his way with the army, but we don't know when we'll launch our counterattack." "There's no rush." Xiao Feng, who carried the rank of Major General, smiled and shook his head. It was rare to have an opportunity like this to train the soldiers. He wanted to let the soldiers of the division go through a sieve. This would be a great help in increasing the fighting strength of the division. Although they were all division commanders, the Cold Front Division's commander had the rank of Major General. Only they and the commander of the world's #1 cavalry army could enjoy this kind of treatment. This was enough to prove the strength of the two armies. On the other hand, the other division commanders were at most senior colonels. In comparison, the difference in status between the two sides was obvious. Even though Major General Xiao Feng said this, Min Fu and Lorui, who were also division commanders but only had the rank of 2 bars and 4 bars, couldn't say anything. When it was almost daybreak, the 2 division commanders were suddenly called into the tent by Xiao Feng. Through their narration, the decision made last night was changed. "Commander Min, Commander Luo, please get ready. Let the soldiers eat in advance and prepare for the counterattack." The reason why the situation changed so quickly was naturally not only because the 3rd Corps' commander Wu Xing had already brought the main force of the army to the periphery of the battlefield, ready to provide support at any time. The main reason was that Yang Qindong had sent a telegram. No one in the 5-star army had the right to question or be dissatisfied with Yang Qindong's orders. This was a kind of respect, a kind of prestige accumulated over a long period of battle. There was another mission for him to finish the battle as quickly as possible. As soon as the telegram was delivered, Xiao Feng knew what to do next. He then called for Min Fu and the other 2 teachers to discuss the matter of counterattacking. The 3 division commanders sat together. The candlelight in the tent was lit for half an hour until the messenger came to report that the soldiers had already eaten breakfast and could attack at any time. The 3 division commanders looked at each other and nodded heavily. After telling each other to pay attention to safety, they walked out of the tent. Outside the encirclement, Harsan Han's face was a bit ugly. He only went to sleep at midnight, but even so, he still tossed and turned in bed for nearly an hour before falling asleep. It wasn't strange for him to have such a performance. He thought that he had the upper hand, but after attacking for a day, not only did he lose 15% of his strength, he didn't even hurt a single hair on the enemy's head. This was the first time he had encountered such a battle in his life. Even when facing the 5-star army in the east, although they were defeated time and time again, they were still able to injure some of the enemy. It wasn't like this time. They were clearly the attacking side, but they could only passively take a beating. He found a few of his subordinates to discuss until midnight, but they still couldn't come up with a better plan. Everyone finally decided to observe carefully the next day to see if they could find a direction to attack. Only then did they go to sleep. At this time, the sky was beginning to brighten. But even so, Harsan Han still didn't have the intention to get up. He didn't sleep well last night, so he wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to sleep a little longer to ensure that he had enough energy to deal with various matters during the day. Whoosh, boom. Harsan Han, who did not want to get out of bed, was about to lie down for a while. Suddenly, a sharp whistling sound rang out beside his ear. Following that, he felt the bedboard shake. The huge explosion caused him to be unable to sleep peacefully. What's going on? What's going on? The frightened Harsan Han got off the bed with his clothes in disarray. He rushed out of the tent and wanted to ask the guard outside what was going on outside. However, what he saw next made him unable to ask any more questions. He could see with his own eyes the cannonballs exploding within the camp, destroying one tent after another. One of the cannonballs was less than 40 steps away from his main tent. Standing in front of the main tent, he could even feel the shockwave from the explosion. In comparison, the surrounding Mongol soldiers weren't much better off. Some of them were directly hit by the cannonballs, and some of them were injured by the shrapnel. Although they didn't die immediately, they breathed out more than they breathed in. Of course, most of them were those who had suffered minor injuries. They were bleeding. The wounds were not big, and there was only a small piece of shrapnel embedded in their bodies. However, if the shrapnel was not taken out, the prolonged bleeding would eventually kill them. It could be said that there was no safe place to hide under the cannonballs. When the cannonballs landed on the Mongol camp, it was already a mess. The general didn't give any orders, and the soldiers didn't have the will to fight. Where did the cannonballs come from? Didn't you say that the cannonballs of the 5-star army weren't surrounded by us? Seeing the hellish scene in front of him, Harsan Han angrily asked. This. A few generals who had run to the main tent lowered their heads. Previously, because the cannonballs of the 2nd Cold Front Regiment were well hidden within the army, and because they didn't encounter any cannonballs yesterday, they were certain of this. But now, it seemed like they had been tricked. Harsan Han, who had vented his anger, knew that this wasn't the time to ask for responsibility. He said, "Go back to the army and think of a way to gather the troops. Be prepared for battle. This Khan is thinking that the cannonballs are just a prelude. Perhaps their real counterattack is coming." Counterattack? They only have 30,000 men, and we have 80,000. Will they counterattack? This sentence attracted the suspicion of the generals. Even at this time, his subordinates still doubted his words. This made Harsan Han very angry. He knew that it was because of his usual actions that his subordinates didn't trust him. If he wanted them to listen to him, he had to negotiate with them. As such, he had to change his tone and explain patiently. It was because of this explanation that the Mongol army lost the most crucial time. As the saying goes, speed is the most important thing in war. Sometimes, every minute and second on the battlefield was the key to victory. While Harsan Han was explaining to his subordinates, the first round of cannonballs of the 5-star army had ended. Following that, the cavalry began their charge. The 20,000 cavalry of the 2 mixed cavalry divisions had long been envious of the achievements of the 5-star army. Now, it was finally their turn to perform. One by one, they galloped forward on their horses and shouted loudly. They also wanted to make a name for themselves. "Great Khan, the 5-star army has indeed launched a counterattack." A young scout rode up to Harsan Han and reported the situation in a loud voice. Facts spoke louder than words. Harsan Han had said a lot earlier, but the generals didn't believe him. However, the facts had slapped them in the face. When the generals looked at Harsan Han, they all revealed looks of admiration. This time, there was no need to say anything. The generals dispersed and began to gather their troops. The Mongol soldiers also had a certain amount of battle experience. When they saw the 5-star Legion Corps charging over, even without the command of their general, many of them were already prepared to charge. They turned their horses around and mounted their horses. They were prepared to engage in a bloody battle with the 5-star army at any time. Commander, the Mongol army's attention is on the interior. This is the time for us to charge. The 3rd Corps Nuzan Cavalry Division's commander Yella had already moved to the periphery of the Mongol army. At this time, he stood beside Wu Sheng and asked for instructions. Good, give the order. All troops attack. Wu Sheng, who couldn't wait any longer, how could he not want to make a name for himself? Previously, under the pincer attack of the Golden Horde and the Ross Dukedom, they could only barely hold their ground. Now that they finally had a chance to make a name for themselves, how could he give it up? With a loud shout, he led his 3 divisions and 30,000 soldiers to charge towards the Mongol army from different directions. At this time, the Mongol army's main focus was on the 5-star army that was surrounded. Although they had arranged for some troops to be stationed at the outer perimeter, it was to prevent the other 5-star corps reinforcements from suddenly appearing and attacking them from both sides. However, with the chaos in the camp and the generals not returning in time, these soldiers had long forgotten about their previous mission. They only wanted to solve the problem in front of them. Now, there was no one to defend behind them. When Wu Sheng appeared with his army, they were caught off guard. Chapter 1502. On the battlefield, the slightest accident could cost a person's life. The enemy troops suddenly appeared behind them, and they were charging ferociously. At this moment, the Mongol army had no choice but to send out a portion of their forces to block them. At this moment, the second wave of cannon fire arrived, causing the Mongol army, who had just regained their order, to fall into chaos once more. The timing was really accurate, and it could be said to be perfect. The cannon fire disrupted the order of the Mongol army, and it also covered the shouts of the Mongol generals, causing them to be unable to gather their troops. In just 15 minutes, the 5-star army had formed a pincer attack. Facing such a situation, many of the Mongol soldiers were confused as to who they should fight. Taking advantage of the fact that the enemy had not formed a defensive formation, Wu Sheng's 3rd Legion charged into the Mongol army like a sharp blade, and they started their massacre. The reason why cavalry was so terrifying and had dominated the battlefield for a whole decade and a century was precisely because they were fast enough, their charge was fierce enough, and their lethality and destructive power were shocking and terrifying. Once they lost these advantages, they were no different from ordinary infantry waiting to be slaughtered. Without impulse, there would be no speed. Without speed, they would not be able to display their strength. Without strength, there would be no killing power, and no destructive power. They were just riding on horses. Facing the soldiers of the 3rd Legion, in just one exchange, the Mongol army was cut down, and over 1,000 of them were injured. As the main force of the 3rd Legion continued to charge into the Mongol army, the number of casualties continued to increase. Block it, block it. Harsan Han also saw this shocking scene. When he saw the cavalrymen, he was proud of being killed off one by one without the slightest ability to resist. He cried out in pain. The various khans were like a chaotic animal kingdom, and there was only one rule of survival, which was the survival of the fittest. Whoever had the biggest fist was the boss, and this was what the Mongol army, which did not have much culture, valued. The reason why he could still make his voice heard in the Khaganate alliance was because he had these cavalry units. This was the fundamental reason why no one could ignore his existence. But now, these cavalrymen that he regarded as his lifeblood couldn't even withstand a single blow from the 5-star army. They were harvested like chives, and it was as if his flesh was being cut off. It made him feel extremely miserable. We can't block them anymore, Khan, let's break out. The captain brought a group of soldiers in front of Harsan Han and begged. On the battlefield, once defeat was apparent, it was not something that could be changed by a single person's decision. That was the situation, and in front of such a situation, even Khan was like a leaf blown by the wind. We can't block them, Harsan Han murmured. Then, as if he had thought of something, his vision blurred, and he fell to the ground at an extremely fast speed. Not good, Khan fainted. Quickly come and help Khan up, we'll kill our way out. Seeing this scene, the captain of the bodyguards shouted in panic. Soon after, a group of bodyguards rushed forward and helped Harsun Han, who had indeed fainted from anger, onto his warhorse. After that, the group of bodyguards charged towards the direction where the 5-star army had fewer soldiers. The army was defeated like a landslide. From the moment the 3rd-star army launched a pincer attack, and the enemy was helpless, the outcome of this battle was already decided. One side was meticulously planned, and the other side was forced to retaliate. This was equivalent to a country suddenly launching an attack. Furthermore, they did not declare war, and they had an even greater advantage in firepower. This battle only lasted for 8 hours, and before the sky turned dark, the battlefield was already filled with corpses and Mongolian prisoners. There were more than 80,000 Mongolian cavaliers, and after the battle, aside from nearly 10,000 who managed to escape in the chaos, around 13,000 died, 20,000 were injured, and the remaining 30,000 or so abandoned their weapons and knelt down to surrender. On the other hand, the 3rd-star army lost less than 500 men, and about 4,000 were injured. With such a small sacrifice, they managed to kill 80,000 enemies. Other than the help of the 2nd Cold Front Division, this also showed the strength of the 3rd-star army. Clean up the battlefield and send a report to the 6th Young Master. At the same time, ask for other allies to come and take care of the prisoners. Wu Xing, who had obtained a great victory, was elated as he gave the order to the reporter beside him. From the fact that Yang Qindong wanted to use the 2nd Cold Front Division, it was obvious that something big was going to happen. Wu Xing did not want to miss such a good opportunity. He did not forget that the 3rd-star army used to be the 3rd Cold Front Division, but because they had not returned for a long time, they had lost all their firearms. However, it did not matter. As long as they performed well enough, they would be able to return to the ranks of the Cold Front Division. At that time, the 3rd-star army would be truly powerful. Yang Qindong, who was rushing over, heard about the situation here through a telegram. He immediately gave the order to report this matter to the entire army. At the same time, he ordered the nearby 3rd-star army, Chiwen, to immediately rush over to the 3rd-star army and the 2nd Cold Front Division to take over everything there. If it was said that Yang Qindong was still somewhat hesitant when Beta Persei suggested to attack the capital of the Timur Empire, Herat, then this victory gave him more confidence. He knew that the conditions of the battlefield had been formed, and it was time to complete the surprise attack. With the help of the 2nd Cold Front Division, the 3rd-star army obtained a great victory over the Mongolian army, defeating 100,000 enemies. After this news was spread through the telegram, the commander of the 1st-star army's 4th Division, Su Kuda, became anxious. Speaking of which, they had clashed with the enemy's main force earlier than anyone else. Moreover, they had also launched several attacks, but the results did not seem to be very good. Although from the results of the battle, they had always had the upper hand, but they did not achieve their goal of heavily injuring the enemy. We can't continue like this. Isn't the 1st-star army less than 200 li away from here? Send a message to them to come and support us. Su Kuda finally decided to send other reinforcements. This was not because he was afraid of the enemy, but because he wanted to use more advantages to annihilate the enemy. Just from this point alone, he already had the qualities of an excellent commander. He no longer cared about the fruits of victory in front of him. He was willing to share the credit with other allies, which was equivalent to having a view of the overall situation. Su Kudo was also preparing for the final attack. In contrast, Commander Tian who had already obtained the fruits of victory. Under his surprise attack, he had successfully captured the capital of the Ilkhanate, Tabuli Tucheng. In order to achieve the goal of not letting the news leak out, the 4 divisions of the army attacked the 4 gates to ensure that no one could escape the city and spread the news. The world's #1 cavalry army was indeed worthy of being an existence that was second only to the Black Cavalry in terms of cold weapons. From the moment they launched their attack to the moment they captured the entire Tabuli Tucheng, they had only used less than 4 hours. Furthermore, they had achieved their goal of not letting a single enemy escape. After quietly capturing the city, Tian who did not let the army take down the old flag of the Ilkhanate. On the surface, the city did not look any different from before. This was him fishing, waiting for the enemy to walk into the trap. Although Tian Hu did not know who would appear here, his intuition and the pattern of the battle told him that there would definitely be enemies here. After 6 days, not a single enemy appeared. Instead, many Mongolian soldiers and civilians were executed because they were hostile to the 5-star army. Letting the world's #1 cavalry army do the work of a third-rate army was indeed a waste of talent. Some of the soldiers had their own opinions about this. Looking at the battlefield, the other allied forces had already made contributions, but the world's #1 cavalry army had only chosen to wait, making them feel sullen. Regarding this, Tian Hu used his aura to suppress it. However, at this moment, his heart wavered a little. If he only obtained this bit of merit in this battle, then he was somewhat unqualified to be a commander. Finally, on the morning of the 7th day, the scouts outside the city reported that they had seen a large number of Mongolian soldiers outside the city. At this time, they were moving in the direction of the city. Hearing that there was finally an enemy who had taken the bait, Tian Hu immediately became spirited. The 5-star army soldiers in the city also changed from their previous dispirited state to full of vigor. At this time, about 5 li away from the city, a group of about 30,000 people was slowly making their way into the city. Leading them was the Ivan Khanate's Harsan Khan, as well as the 20,000 Kazakh Khanate cavalry led by Alatang. After the defeat, Harsan Khan had killed his way out of the encirclement under the protection of his personal guards. Following that, he gathered the remaining soldiers and gathered about 10,000 people. After that, he met the 20,000 Kazakh cavalry who were coming to support him. Thus, he mixed them into one army and retreated to Tabuli Tucheng. At the same time, he reorganized his army and looked for an opportunity to fight again. Harsan Khan did not admit defeat because he did not know what had happened on the other battlefields. He only thought that it was his own army that had lost. Then he still had 200,000 cavalry at his disposal. Moreover, as long as he could hold on, the other Khanates might continue to send reinforcements. Harsan Khan was not discouraged as there was still hope to turn defeat into victory. Gathering the 20,000 Kazakh cavalry was the first step. The 30,000 cavalry, under the leadership of Harsan Khan, turned around and headed towards Tabuli Tucheng. At this time, no one would have thought that their base was no longer under their control and had become a graveyard. After knowing the exact number of enemies, Tian Hu knew that it was not realistic to want to destroy them in the city. Once the enemy found out that the commander guarding the city had changed, he was afraid that the first thing they would do was to escape. Thus, he had waited for 6 days in vain. This result was unacceptable to Tian Hu. Chapter 1503. Since they couldn't destroy them in the city, they would just go out and destroy them. Destroying the enemy in the wilderness was the specialty of the world's #1 cavalry army. Just like that, the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 5th divisions received their respective missions. Tian Hu left the most boring task of defending the city to the 5,000 men under his direct command, the reinforced regiment, which was under his command. After being angry for the past few days, they needed to vent their anger. Tian Hu called the 4 division commanders over and said in front of them, "I've given you a chance. If you can't stop these 30,000 enemies, then you don't need to stay in the position of division commanders and become a joke to others." No matter what method he used, Tian Hu was able to raise the morale of the 4 division commanders. When Harsan Han led his army to the city gates and saw the tightly shut gates, he angrily cursed. The flags of the Ilkhanate that were originally placed on top of the city gates were all pulled out and thrown onto the city walls. Instead, they were replaced with bright-colored flags of the 5 stars. Tian Hu also officially appeared on the city walls and ordered the soldiers below to use their bows and arrows to shoot down from above. The arrows fell like rain and landed in the Mongolian army's camp, causing waves of mournful cries. Tian Hu took the initiative to attack, which was equivalent to giving the order to attack. Outside the city, the 4 cavalry divisions that had been lying in ambush, a total of 40,000 men, suddenly appeared. They locked down all the escape routes of the Mongol army and charged in from the outside, reaping the lives of the Mongol cavalry. The world's #1 cavalry army's warriors, who had been fighting with all their might, finally had a chance to vent their anger. At this time, they all wanted to bring out all their skills and use all their strength to wave their arms. Therefore, they could only use 90% of their strength, not 80%. The first army's cavalry was so fierce, and with the sudden attack, they quickly broke through the 3 defense lines that Harsanhan had set up. Seeing that the 4th defense line was about to be broken, Harsanhan's face became incomparably pale. He did not know why his own Khan Dabuli had been captured, he did not know at all, he also did not know why these 5-star troops appeared here. All he could do now was to reprimand General Dexy, and reprimand him and the Kazakh cavalry for their incompetence. In his view, there were 20,000 Kazakh cavalry, and with his 10,000 troops, there were 30,000 people. The Han army only had 40,000 people, which was 10,000 more than them. Even if they couldn't win, they shouldn't have lost so miserably. It was impossible that they didn't even have a chance to break out. He completely treated General Dexy as his subordinate and scolded him. Even Alatang couldn't stand it, not to mention General Dexy himself. No matter what, he is still a general of the Kazakh Khanate and not a subordinate of Harsan Khan. Even if you have something to discuss, you should discuss it with him and not scold him like a dog. After being scolded, the anger in Dexy's heart was getting bigger and bigger. This time, when he came to the battlefield, he didn't have any opportunity to show off. He encountered Harsan Han and was brought here. Then, he was inexplicably attacked. If it was anyone else, they would have already been incomparably depressed. This scolding made his heart even angrier, but he didn't have a suitable opportunity to vent. Enough, I am a general of the Kazakh Khaganate, not your Ilkhanate's general. At this moment, Dexy wanted to shout out his thoughts. But he didn't dare to do so. Among the Khaganates, Kazakh was the first to fight with the 5-star army. Because their geographical location was very close to the Ili region, they had invested a large number of troops early on. As a result, their losses were very serious. For example, Janilbek Khan's younger brother, Keliai, was captured by the 5-star army. Many of the country's generals were killed, and a second-rate general like Keliai was now in charge of military power. Dexy had some ability, otherwise, he wouldn't be in charge of 20,000 soldiers. But his personality was too weak, and he was a bit timid. Because of this, his career had never been smooth. This time, he came to support the Ilkhanate because there were no generals in the Khaganate, which gave him the opportunity. If it was anyone else who was scolded like this by Harsanhan, they would have been furious and refuted. But Dexy didn't have such courage, and this naturally had a lot to do with his personality. But this didn't mean that he wasn't angry. When he left the Great Khan's tent and returned to his own tent, the more he thought about it, the angrier he became. When he heard how brave the 5-star army was and how it was only a matter of time, he couldn't see the slightest future. It was also at this time that the guard captain Wan Yanhong proposed to him to surrender the 5-star army. This was because he understood Dexy. He knew that this person's personality was weak, and that he was indecisive when doing things. If it was any other general, the guard captain wouldn't dare to be so direct. And after he said this, Dexy didn't have any intention of blaming him. On the contrary, he was quite hesitant. "General, we can't wait any longer." The battle during the day was all because of the terrain. There wasn't enough open space, so the 5-star army couldn't display their abilities in a large-scale battle. This is why we were able to hold on for the day. Once we wait until tomorrow and face another fierce attack, I'm afraid we really won't be able to hold on. Guard Captain Wan Yanhong saw that Dexy didn't say anything and didn't make a decision, so he helped him analyze the situation of the battlefield. Being pressed hard by Wan Yanhong, Dexy replied, "But will the 5-star army accept our surrender? If they treat us like normal captives, then what's the point of surrendering and living a life worse than death?" Seeing that Dexy was wavering, Wan Yanhong hurriedly said, "General, there's no good way out if we surrender like this, but at least we can keep our lives, right? The current situation is that the 5-star army is too strong. This lowly one will say something disappointing. This time, not only will the Ilkhanate be finished, even our Kazakh Khanate won't be any better. If things go wrong, our Khanate will be destroyed. Right now, we won't get any benefits from selling our lives to those people. This can't be. Dexy raised his head, his face filled with fear and uneasiness. How can it not be? Think about how strong the Golden Horde is, but in front of the 5-star army, won't it still be destroyed? Although our Khanates don't look weak, we're all fighting for ourselves. Under these conditions, how can we be a match for the 5-star army? Today, the Ilkhanate will be destroyed. Next time, it might be someone else. Actually, we can be considered lucky. Wang Yanhong sighed. Lucky? What do you mean? This made Dexy a bit confused. General, think about it. We were the first batch to come into contact with the 5-star army. If we surrender now, we'll have more chances to gain merits. This lowly one heard that in the 5-star army, there are many soldiers and generals from the Golden Horde. Some generals even lead large armies. It must be because the 5-star army is developing too quickly and there aren't enough generals. But speaking of which, isn't this an opportunity for people like you? As long as you seize the opportunity, you can completely transform into a general of the 5-star army. That would be the best case scenario. Becoming a general of the 5-star army, is that possible? Dexy shook his head, his face filled with disbelief. What's impossible about it? Even if it's impossible, so what? Even the Khan's younger brother, Kalai, has been captured. Even if we surrender, it won't be a shameful matter. Not to mention, there's an opportunity to make a contribution right in front of us. As long as we can grab hold of it, who can say what the outcome will be? Wang Yanhong looked at Deshi with a hopeful expression. What opportunity to gain merits? Dexy clearly thought of something, but he still wanted to get confirmation from Wang Yanhong. It was because he understood his general too well that Wang Yanhong didn't hesitate to whisper, capture Harsan Khan. This is the opportunity for you to gain merits. No. No, the other party is the Khan of a Khanate. We can't do that. Dexy quickly shook his head and refused. He was used to being a subject. Now that he was suddenly asked to capture the Khan, it was no wonder he had such a big reaction. Wang Yanhong anxiously sighed in his heart. He knew that persuading him wouldn't lead to any good results, so he simply closed his mouth and walked out of the tent. When Wang Yanhong walked out of the tent, the few Kiliarchs waiting outside walked up and asked with a hopeful expression, Captain Wang Yan, how is the situation? These people were either afraid of the 5-star army's strength and didn't want to die. Or they saw the situation clearly and knew that they couldn't win even if they continued fighting. There were also people who wanted to change sides. In the face of no hope, they wanted to make their own choice and live a different life. In short, these people were all generals who wanted to surrender to the 5-star army. There were a total of 7 of them. In this army of 20,000 people, they were quite a force to be reckoned with. Seeing these people's eyes filled with hope and fighting spirit, Wang Yanhong opened his mouth and said, the general is still hesitating. He hasn't made a final decision yet. Aya, how can we do that? It's dark now, so the 5-star army won't attack. However, when the sun rises, they won't wait any longer. Right now, the soldiers in the army are scared to death. They are all frightened by the strength of the 5-star army. If this continues, we won't be able to hold them off tomorrow. Are we all going to die here? Yes, yes. We don't want to die yet. We must convince the general. Chapter 1504. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation, yes, we have to convince the general. Listen to my instructions. Wang Yanhong nodded. How could he not see that the army had lost their will to fight and morale? How could they win a battle with such an army? Right now, the only option left for them was to surrender. Since Deshi couldn't understand, they would force him to make a decision. Wang Yanhong's eyes flashed with determination. He had been by the general's side for so many years and he knew what he had to do to convince him. Under Wang Yanhong's leadership, the generals quickly gathered together to discuss a plan. In less than an hour, Wang Yanhong returned to the tent. After all, as the captain of the personal guards, his duty was to protect the general. When Wang Yanheng entered the tent, he saw a scene that made him exasperated. This was because Dishi was already sound asleep and was even snoring. It was really unimaginable that the general could still sleep when the war was so tense. One had to admit that he had a big heart. This also proved that the general didn't have any intention of rebelling. It was also because of this that Wang Yanheng was firm in his decision. He turned and walked out of the tent. He nodded to the few Kiliarchs who were waiting outside. In half an hour, we will act according to plan. Wang Yanheng's plan was to try his best to convince Dishi. If it really didn't work, then the only way was to mutiny. For the sake of his brothers and himself, he was willing to be the bad guy. After Wang Yanheng said this, he turned and went back into the tent. He laid down on the fur mat in the corner of the tent. That was originally a place for him to rest. Not long after he lay down, there was a sudden shout from outside the tent. The noise was not small, and it woke up Dishi, who was sleeping. What's going on? What's going on? Don't tell me the 5-star army is attacking overnight? Hearing Dishi's anxious shout, Wang Yanheng pretended to have just woken up and rubbed his eyes. He asked, "Who's making a racket outside?" "It's us." Following this voice, several figures walked into the tent. Upon closer inspection, they were none other than the Kiliarchs who had been waiting outside for news. All of a sudden, these people squeezed into the tent, making it seem a little crowded. Dishi was also shocked by these figures. He instinctively reached for the scimitar beside the bed. Fortunately, Wang Yanheng stood out and blocked Dishi. He then looked at these Kiliarchs with a questioning expression and shouted, "What are you doing?" "Captain Wang Yan, don't panic. We are here to report the military situation." The leading Kiliarch knelt on the ground with a thud and said in a tearful voice, reporting to General, "This lowly one has just spent a lot of money to obtain information from Ili Khan's army. Harsan Khan has already ordered us to take the lead and launch a counterattack against the 5-star army tomorrow morning, and then kill a way out for them. General, there is no need to mention the strength of the 5-star army. What is the difference between doing this and committing suicide? Harsan Khan is not our Kazakh great Khan. There is no need for us to make such sacrifices for him." "That's right. They don't even see us as humans. There is no need for us to work for them. General, please give the order. We will break out of the encirclement tonight. Even if we die, we will not serve Harsan Khan." The generals below all spoke one after another, expressing their strong dissatisfaction with Ili Khan Harsan Khan. When Dishi heard all of this, his face turned even redder. At this time, he had no time to distinguish whether this news was true or false. He thought of how Harsan Khan had cursed him during the day. He was already angry to begin with. He really wanted to ignore Harsan Khan and lead his troops to kill their way out. At that time, it would be lucky if they could charge out, but if they couldn't, then it would be his fate to die on the battlefield. However, his hesitant personality came into play at this time. Dishi still hesitated. He didn't want his soldiers to be wronged, but he also didn't want to become enemies with Harsan Khan. Therefore, he didn't know what to do. Looking at this time, Dishi still didn't make a final decision. Wang Yanheng, who was at the side, decided to press on and force him to make a decision. He stepped forward and said, "General, I can understand your feelings. As a subject, as a general, we should listen to the orders of the monarch. But the problem is that we are not people of the Ili Khanate. If the 5-star army didn't appear, then our two Khanates would have fought at any time. Is it worth it for us to protect such a person with our lives? Moreover, whether or not we can protect Harsan Khan's life is another matter. However, we brothers will definitely die here. Please take into account that we have all followed the general for so many years and give us a way out." A way out? Dishi once again remembered what Wang Yanheng had said to him. At that time, because of his many years of subordinate mentality, when he heard that he would do something unfavorable to the great Khan, he didn't even think about it and refused. If he really did that, then he would be a traitor to the entire Khanate alliance and would be punished by everyone. He quickly shook his head and said, "No, no, although Harsan Khan isn't our great Khan, he is one of the great Khans recognized by the Khanate alliance. As subjects, we can't have such thoughts. Generals, please don't say any more. Tomorrow morning, I will find Harsan Khan and make him give up on the idea of sending troops to take the lead." Dishi's words were completely self-deceiving. With his personality, how could he argue in front of Harsan Khan? Obviously, he couldn't. This was just his words of comfort. It was because he didn't have the courage to make a choice and didn't have the courage to say no to his superiors that he had to lie to these Kiliarchs. This was a matter of the inheritance and education of the Khanate. In order for their rule to be passed down for 10,000 years or even longer, these great Khans had instilled in their generals, soldiers, and people the idea of loyalty to the great Khan. They let them know that the great Khan was the chosen one and they could decide all life and death. On the other hand, no one was allowed to have any thoughts about the great Khan. Otherwise, it would be going against the will of the heavens and everyone would have the right to punish them. It was this product of Dexi's education that made him want to protect the safety of the great Khan even in the face of life and death. Even if the great Khan was not from his own country, he was still very important in his eyes. "Alright, everyone disperse first." Harsan Khan said that he has already reported this matter to the outside. "Soon, there will be reinforcements coming. As long as we can hold on until then, everyone will be fine. At that time, Harsan Khan will definitely reward us according to our contributions, ha." Dishi wasn't stupid and knew how to use this method to unite the people. He gave everyone hope and drew a beautiful blueprint in front of them. This way, not only could he stabilize the people's hearts, but when the battle broke out, everyone would be able to use their full strength. However, this kind of ordinary method was destined to fail today. Who didn't know that because of the sudden appearance of the 5-star army, they didn't have time to send people to ask for reinforcements? So where did this so-called reinforcements come from? They didn't know what happened here at all, okay? Seeing that Dishi still wanted to deceive them at this time, everyone's expression became unfriendly. Since this kind of persuasion didn't work, there was only one last method left. Thinking of this, everyone's gaze landed on the personal guard captain Wan Yanhong. Of course, Wan Yanhong knew what everyone wanted to do. To be honest, this was the last step. If there was any other method, he wouldn't want to do it. However, Dishi was so stubborn and didn't listen to anyone's advice. Thus, he could only resort to something like a mutiny. What are you all trying to do? No matter what, Dishi was still a commander of 20,000 people. When the atmosphere in the tent suddenly changed, he had a premonition that things weren't going well. His expression couldn't help but reveal a trace of panic. "Sigh, General, why do you have to do this? Since you're thinking of going up and not giving us a way out, then you can't blame us." Wan Yanhong finally spoke. The moment he spoke, the 7 Kiliarchs in the tent rushed up like ferocious beasts and pressed Dishi, who had already touched the curved blade, to the ground. Previously, Wan Yanhong was blocking in front. Now that this personal guard captain wasn't there to help, Dishi instantly became a prisoner. No matter what, he was still a personal guard captain and was responsible for the general's safety. Wan Yanhong didn't have any intention of harming Dishi. He decided to hand this person over to the 5-star army to deal with. His current mission was to bring people to take down Harsan Khan. Taking advantage of the fact that the other party didn't know what was going on and wasn't on guard, he quickly took him down. Only then could he appear before the 5-star army as a meritorious subject. At this moment, Harsan Khan, who was 2 li away from the tent, didn't know about the mutiny below. At this moment, he had already entered the land of dreams and seemed to be having a bad dream. He had a conflicted expression on his face. It wasn't until Wan Yanhong brought people to place the curved blade on his neck that he woke up with a start. "Who are you people? What do you want?" When he woke up and saw a bunch of unfamiliar soldiers standing in front of him, Harsan Khan instinctively wanted to shout. However, he immediately felt his vision turn black and was knocked out by a punch. The person who made the move was Wan Yanhong. He only knocked Harsun Han out because he didn't want to cause any more trouble. Now that the people who should be controlled were under control, he personally said to a chilly arch beside him, "I'll leave the matters at home to you guys. I'm going to the 5-star Army's main camp now. Captain Wan Yan, are you going to go personally?" The chilly arch was a little nervous. In his opinion, before he understood the 5-star Army's attitude, there was no harm in sending someone else to communicate with them first. It was the best plan. "Yes, I'll go personally. If I send someone else, they won't be able to explain clearly." Wan Yanhong chuckled. Then, he brought a healthy horse and galloped out of the main camp. Chapter 1505. At midnight, the 5-star Army's camp was very quiet. Other than the soldiers on duty, the other soldiers and officers had already gone to bed early. There was still a tough battle waiting for them tomorrow. Without sufficient physical and mental strength, it would be impossible. However, in the main tent, Temu, and the other 3 division commanders were not sleeping. The 4 of them were glaring at each other, looking as though they had nowhere to vent their anger. The attack during the day wasn't very successful. Because the terrain was too narrow, the 5-star Army's few charges were limited by the terrain. They couldn't unleash their full potential. Not only that, they had nowhere to hide under the rain of arrows. As a result, nearly 1,000 soldiers died. Although less than 300 of them died in the battle, most of them were injured. Moreover, they could still return to the camp after treatment. However, to the world's #1 cavalry army, this was still a big blow. 40,000 against 30,000. They had the advantage in numbers and even launched a surprise attack. However, they didn't win the battle and even lost many soldiers. No matter how one looked at it, this was a humiliation. It was a slap to the faces of the 4 division commanders. The 4 division commanders, who were always chatty when they gathered together, fell into silence for the first time. They didn't even inform Tian Hu of this news. Otherwise, who knew what kind of thunderous roar they would face? Every division commander would have to bear a punishment first. This time, it could be said that the 4 division commanders had disgraced the invincible and undefeatable #1 cavalry army. What made the 4 division commanders even angrier was that tomorrow's attack wouldn't be too smooth. They knew that there was no way to retreat. If the enemy fought with their backs to the wall, even if they won in the end, they would have to pay a heavy price. They had the advantage in numbers but still had to pay a heavy price. This was something the 4 division commanders couldn't accept. Of course, it wasn't that there wasn't a better way. For example, they could surround the enemy and not attack. After a long time, the enemy would have to surrender when they ran out of food and water. However, how much time would that take? Seeing that all the armies and divisions were seizing every second to gain merits on the battlefield, they had no choice but to surround the less than 30,000 enemies and wait here. This was not something that a powerful army like the #1 cavalry army in the world should do. Sigh, if only we had the Cold Vanguard Division to cooperate with us, 2nd Division Commander Lu Duo couldn't help but say. Of course, everyone understood that with the Cold Vanguard Division present, with their firearms advantage, they would only need to fire at the Mongol army from time to time, and they would be able to beat them until they cried for their parents. It was not impossible for them to surrender without fighting. Alright, in the past, we didn't need the help of the Cold Vanguard Division. Now, we can do the same. Let's think of a better way. The 5th Division's Division Commander Gong Feng spoke up. Speaking of which, among the 4 division commanders, he was the last to enter the 1st Cavalry Army. However, the other 3 division commanders did not dare to treat his words carelessly. Who didn't know that Gong Feng's teacher was Yang Qindong? With this relationship, he was someone who could reach the heavens. This was something that Temu, Lu Duo, and Hu Bo, could not compare to. After complaining, the 4 of them sat together to think of a solution. However, due to the narrow terrain, they really didn't have any good ideas. The greatest advantage of the 1st Cavalry Army was two. The first was their ferocious attacks. They were skilled in horsemanship and were good at using dual blades. Often, they would be able to catch the enemy off guard and win from there. Secondly, they had the Big Dipper crossbow, which was a close combat killing weapon. This allowed them to win against many enemies despite being outnumbered. However, no matter which one it was, they needed to be in close combat with the enemy to be able to display their advantage. Once they were restricted by the terrain, their battle strength would be greatly reduced. This was also the reason why the 4 division commanders had such a headache. Sigh, if only the enemy would surrender. 1st Division Commander Temu scratched his head and said with a silly look. His words also attracted the laughter of the other 3 teachers, which eased the originally oppressive atmosphere a little. However, everyone knew that it was impossible for the enemy to surrender. At least now was not the time for the enemy to see their true strength. Moreover, Harsanhan was still the great Khan of a country. How could he choose to surrender when he was not completely defeated? Unless it was a mutiny. Reporting. Just as the 4 division commanders were laughing and racking their brains to come up with a solution, the voice of the guard outside the door rang out. Reporting to the 4 division commanders. A person who claims to be Wan Yanhong broke into the camp and has been caught by our soldiers. However, he said that he wants to see the great general here. Broke into the camp? What do you mean? The 4 division commanders looked at each other. In the end, it was Gong Feng who made the decision. Bring him in. In a short while, Wan Yanhong, with his hands tied behind his back, walked into the tent under the watch of 2 5-star army soldiers. He saw the 4 division commanders sitting side by side. The moment he entered the tent, Wan Yanhong, who had been silent the entire time, immediately shouted, "What are you all doing? Is this the treatment for those who voluntarily surrender? If that's the case, then you can kill me." Wan Yanhong said preemptively. He wanted the teacher to snatch the person away. Only then would he be able to take the initiative in the following conversation. However, it was a pity that facing the 4 division commanders who had walked out of a mountain of blades and a sea of flames, their powerful auras still scared him, causing his body to tremble uncontrollably. All of this was clearly seen by the 4 division commanders. They knew that Wan Yanhong was trembling out of fear, but Gong Feng and the other 3 division commanders didn't take the initiative to expose him. This was because they were also very curious. What was Wan Yanhong doing here at this time? What did he mean by taking the initiative to surrender just now? Come, untie him and give him a seat. Gong Feng spoke on behalf of the 4 division commanders. The 2 guards weren't worried that Wan Yanhong would play any tricks. Which of the 4 division commanders in front of them wasn't a match for 100 or 1,000 men? Why would they worry about a surrendered general who didn't have a weapon? Immediately, the ropes were untied and a chair was placed in front of him. Even though he was still a bit scared, Wan Yanhong still forced himself to be calm and sat on the chair. Following that, his gaze swept across the faces of the 4 division commanders. The 2 guards had already retreated, leaving only 5 people in the large tent. In a situation where no one spoke, the atmosphere was a bit frighteningly quiet. This was especially true for Wan Yanhong. When he felt the pressure from the 4 division commanders who were filled with killing intent, it was impossible for him to pretend to be calm. Large amounts of sweat began to flow out from his forehead. Even though the weather at this time didn't exceed 10 degrees at night, Wan Yanhong still felt his body heat up and his heart was fluttering. Just when he felt that he couldn't withstand this aura anymore, Gong Feng spoke. It was as if a blazing sun shone on his body in the cold winter, causing him to feel warmth all over his body. "You're called Wan Yanhong. Don't be nervous. What did you mean by surrendering?" "Oh, this little one is called Wan Yanhong. I'm the personal guard captain of General Dexy sent by the Kazakh Khanate. This time, I came here to..." Wan Yanhong repeated what he had wanted to say in his heart. At this time, he still kept a secret. He only said that if he surrendered, would the 5-star army accept them and how they would be treated. He didn't say that he had already controlled General Dexy and Harsanhan from the Ilkhanate. Wan Yanhong wasn't sure if the 5-star army would accept his surrender. If they couldn't accept it, then he would just fight. His principle was that if someone didn't let him have an easy time, then he wouldn't let them have an easy time either. Wang Yanhong's tone was probing. When the other 3 division commanders heard this, they all revealed an impatient expression. They thought that Wang Yanhong was negotiating with them. How could the world's #1 cavalry army allow a defeated army to negotiate with them? On the other hand, Gong Feng gave the other 3 division commanders a look to calm them down. Then, he laughed and said, "Wan Yan, it should be a big surname. I wonder if General Wang Yanhong is related to it." It had to be said that this was the benefit of studying. Gong Feng was Yang Qindong's student, so he naturally knew a lot. When he asked this question, Wang Yanhong's body shook and he lowered his head. Looking at this scene, Gong Feng's intuition told him that Wang Yanhong should be related to the Wang Yan clan. He laughed and said, "What? Is there something that you can't say?" "Oh, no. Since the general has asked, there's no harm in telling you. Actually, my ancestor is the Wang Yan clan. We were defeated by the Kazakh Khanate and became their captives. Because my performance was good, General Dexy took a fancy to me and appointed me as the captain of the Kazakh Khanate." When Wang Yanhong spoke of this, he could clearly feel the heaviness in his heart. Although it was summarized in 2 simple sentences, he must have experienced a lot of things. Moreover, it should be very sad. When he heard this, Gong Feng's expression became better. His intuition told him that this should be a breakthrough that would greatly benefit their following work. "Oh, so it's like this. It seems like we have more things to talk about with Brother Wang Yan. At least we have the same enemy, right?" "The same enemy?" Wang Yanhong's face was filled with confusion. "Yes, the Kazakh Khanate is our common enemy. If you are willing, we can help your Wang Yan clan take revenge." Gong Feng nodded solemnly and said, "At that time, as long as we break through the Kazakh Khanate, we can save your suffering clansmen and return them their freedom. At that time, you, Wang Yanhong, will be the benefactor of the entire Wang Yan clan, hee. Of course, if you want us to do this, you have to show some sincerity. For example, help us deal with the enemies in front of us." Chapter 1506. When Wang Yanhong heard that he would be the benefactor of the Wang Yan clan, he was stunned. He didn't even hear what Gong Feng said next. He only knew that the 5-star army was willing to return the freedom of the Wang Yan clan after destroying the Kazakh Khanate. This was what all the Wang Yan clan members wanted the most. Previously, he chose to betray General Keshi's order because he didn't want to die here. His Wang Yan clan was still in deep trouble. If he couldn't save them, he wouldn't be able to die in peace. Although this goal was far away and he might not be able to accomplish it even if he survived, at least he was still alive. He could work hard for this goal and there was still hope. He didn't expect that this hope would become reality so easily. How could Wang Yanhong not be excited? How could he not do his best for the 5-star army to attack the Kazakh Khanate? "Brother Wang Yan, did you hear what I said? What do you think?" Gong Feng looked at Wang Yanhong for a long time. Wang Yanhong didn't say anything. Instead, tears flowed from the corners of his eyes. Gong Feng couldn't help but urge him. "Oh, I agree to all the requests of the 5-star army. As long as they can save our Wang Yan clan members, I will do anything. Oh right, I have already controlled General Keshi, Harsenhan, and the others. Now, we just need to wait for the 5-star army to come and take them. Oh right, I also know of a small path that leads to the Kazakh Khanate's capital. It was a path that our Wang Yan clan members often took. Other than us, no one else knows about it." After Gong Feng said that he could help the Wang Yan clan, Wang Yanhong completely fell. He told them everything that he knew, and the 4 teachers were all very excited after listening to him. Just a moment ago, they were still having a headache about how to deal with the 30,000 enemies in front of them with the smallest price. Now, not only was this problem solved, the direction of their campaign was also pointed out. For a moment, the 4 division commanders couldn't help but laugh. Herat City. In the capital of the Timur Empire, Great Khan Amur was furiously cursing Harsan Khan's stupidity. At this time, Khan Amur still didn't know that Harsan Khan had already become a captive of the five-star army and had been betrayed by his own people. All his attention was now focused on the crisis in front of him. Ever since he took over the position of Grand Khan of Timur from Abu Said Mirza, Amur had wholeheartedly wanted to strengthen the Timur Empire, and this was his lifelong goal. However, some goals were easier said than done. It had to be said that Amur had a clever side to him. In order to achieve this goal, he had intentionally pretended to be unambitious. He had even turned a blind eye to the conflicts between the other nearby Khaganates, giving others the impression that he was a man who ruled without doing anything and had no ambition. In fact, he just wanted to use this method to reap the benefits. Seeing these Khaganates fighting in a group, consuming their own strength, and once they were seriously injured, it would be time for him to open his bloody mouth and seize the fruits of victory. This was what he thought and did. Recuperating and building up strength was only for the sake of accumulating strength. When the five-star army suddenly appeared, he was even more overjoyed. With such an enemy coming out to disturb the situation, it was impossible for those Khaganates who wanted to protect themselves to not send out their troops and expend their resources. At that time, as long as the five-star army was driven away, he would be able to pacify the entire region and establish a powerful Khaganate. But he never expected that the five-star army would win many battles with a thunderous momentum, bringing great pressure to the Khaganates. This kind of pressure made Amur feel that he couldn't bear it anymore. What he wanted was for the five-star army to disturb the situation, not for the other party to be strong enough to destroy all the Khaganates. If that was the case, how could he achieve his goal? Gradually, Amur discovered that the five-star army had become his #1 enemy. He had no choice but to change his strategy and began to unite more Khaganates to face this powerful enemy together. For this reason, he felt pity for the two battlefields on the east and west. For this reason, he sent 50,000 cavalry to each side of the battlefield. But even so, the situation on the battlefield was still not optimistic. They could only barely block the attacks of the five-star army. Thus, he placed all his hopes on Harsan Khan. He believed that in order to protect his Ilkhanate from being destroyed, he would definitely use as much strength as he could. This was why he allowed Harsan Khan to become the commander of the Western Front, leading 300,000 cavalry to fight against the five-star army. Before the war, Amur still held a rather optimistic attitude. No matter what, they still had the home advantage. As long as they could fight a war of attrition with the five-star army, after a long time, the other party would definitely retreat without reinforcements and logistical support. At that time, the other party would have failed once and it would be even more difficult for them to enter this territory again. Perhaps they wouldn't be able to carry out a second expedition in their lifetime. In that case, he would be able to carry out his plan of annexing the various khanates and strengthening the Timur Empire. With 300,000 against 400,000, and with the defensive position and the advantage of being the host, the result of this war could be predicted. Just as Amur was looking at all this with optimism, bad news came one after another. First, the five-star army fought 100,000 against 100,000, entangling his main force. Next, the five-star army fought 30,000 against 100,001, driving away Harsan Khan's troops, shocking many people. Then, the Norman Khaganate was destroyed by the five-star army through a sneak attack. This made Amur extremely shocked. He could not figure out how the five-star army did it. And now, an even more severe test was placed in front of him. The five-star army actually changed the direction of their advance and headed straight for his Timur Empire. As the most powerful existence among the Khaganates, the Timur Empire was located in the middle of all the Khaganates. This was their advantage. They could suddenly dispatch troops to attack any Khaganate at any time. But at the same time, it was also their disadvantage. They could dispatch troops to attack from any Khaganate. In the past, the Timur Empire was the dominant power. The other small Khaganates nearby only thought about how to curry favor with him. How could they think of attacking him? Therefore, he was not worried. But now, with the appearance of the 5-star army, they would not carry out their plan. When he heard that the 5-star army had dispatched troops to the Timur Empire from the Ilkhanate and the Norman Khaganate, Amur was indeed frightened and angry. He was angry at the arrogance of the 5-star army, but also worried about whether he could block the enemy's advance. Men, summon Great General Manjalatu. Amur, who was a little flustered, decided to do something. He couldn't continue to wait like this. Otherwise, not to mention that he wouldn't be able to realize his ambitions, whether he could establish a foothold in the world would become a very serious problem. Manjalatu was fully deserving of the title of Great General of the Timur Empire. This person was extremely capable. On the battlefield, he was also known as the King of 100 Victories. It was rumored that when the nearby Khaganates heard his name, children would stop crying. From this, it could be seen how influential he was. After being summoned into the hall, Manjalatu strode in front of Amur. Without waiting for him to salute, Amur asked in a hurried tone, "Great General, you should be aware of the situation. Do you have any way to deal with the enemy? It's just a two-legged sheep. It's not a big deal." Manjalatu, who was not tall and had a face full of beard, smiled conceitedly with a look of indifference. For some reason, after seeing Manjalatu's performance, Amur, who was originally somewhat anxious, calmed down a lot. "Oh, but what is the Great General's arrangement?" "It's very simple. We'll just have to deal with whatever comes our way. The enemy is coming from afar. Their provisions will definitely be insufficient. We only need to fight a war of attrition with them. We can delay them until they have no choice but to retreat. Moreover, our Timur Empire has a lot of water plants, mountains, and lakes. We can use this advantageous terrain to deal with them. In short, we don't need to fight a big battle. Our main goal is to harass them. As long as we can hold on for a while, the enemy will have no choice but to consider retreating." Amur nodded in satisfaction after hearing this. However, he felt that the other party had not finished speaking, so he asked tentatively, "But I wonder if there are any other methods?" "Of course there are, Great Khan. We can send people to contact Bangladesh and provide them with gold and silver. Let them send troops to harass the rear of the 5-star army. When the rear is on fire, the 5-star army will not be able to fight a war of attrition with us here. At that time, we can divert the trouble and stabilize the situation." Manjalatu's face was full of confidence. Obviously, he had already prepared for this. "Good, this Khan has the Great General's help. It's just a two-legged sheep. What is there to fear?" So, the 250,000 cavalrymen in the country will all be handed over to the Great General. This Khan will wait for the good news of the Great General's victory. Amur laughed and handed over the military power. Over the past few years, the Timur Empire had prepared a total of 350,000 cavalrymen, which was definitely a powerful force. Even when the Golden Horde was at its peak, the Timur Empire still couldn't compare to it. They still had to rely on the Cherkass people and the Alans to fight against the 5-star army. Just from this aspect alone, the Timur Empire was clearly a bit more powerful. After handing over everything to Manjalatu, Amur waited for the final result. He was full of confidence in the Great General. At this time, young Chindong, who was rushing from the Ilkhanate to the Timur Empire, also learned about Manjalatu from the intelligence department. Chapter 1507. There was quite a bit of information that was sent over, all of it showing how troublesome and terrifying this person was. Even young Chindong felt that this person was a bit troublesome. He had a feeling that this person's existence would greatly hinder his great plan of unifying the Timur Empire. "Inform Chushi to come down and meet me." After Yang Chindong threw down these words to Badeo Jiang, who was accompanying him, he continued to look through all of the information related to the Timur Empire in his hands. He was considering a suitable path of advance. Right now, it wasn't only their army that was rushing towards the Timur Empire. Apart from the 4 divisions of the world's #1 cavalry army, as well as the Russian division, all of the other 5-star army, totaling over 300,000, were converging here from all directions. There was no need to talk about the world's #1 cavalry army. They had already taken down the capital of the Ilkhanate, Buli-Tucheng, and were preparing to take a small path to the rear of the Kazakh Khanate. They were going straight for the capital, striving to open up a path there. This way, they would be able to meet up with the 5-star army in the east. Once this matter was accomplished, it would be the same as opening up an important path for supplies. This would play a decisive role in prolonging the army's ability to fight. Even Yang Qindong didn't think that Tianhu's #1 cavalry army would do this. When he received the telegram, he was excited for quite a while. Ahuli's Russian division was currently clearing out the remnants of the Allied forces in the Ilkhanate. After several battles, the Allied forces could be said to have suffered successive defeats. The original 300,000 Allied forces were now reduced to less than 60,000. Ahuli, this valiant general, took responsibility for this matter. It had to be said that he was worthy of being someone who had once been a great Khan. He really did have a way of leading troops. According to the telegram, Ahuli had already fought against the Allied forces of the Ilkhanate 8 times, and suffered defeat once. Apart from these two armies, Yang Qindong had mobilized all of the forces he could currently mobilize. From this, it could be seen how much importance he attached to the Timur Empire. It could also be said that once the Timur Empire was taken down, the so-called Khanate alliance would be disbanded. What followed would be encirclement and suppression. This also meant that the Yangtze's territory had expanded by at least a third. And in order to achieve this goal, they had to get rid of the Timur Empire first. And if they wanted to destroy the Timur Empire, they had to get rid of Mendulatu, who was a difficult general to deal with. Otherwise, if the army was really exhausted here and the provisions couldn't be transported up in time, once summer passed and winter came, they would only have one path left, which was to retreat. This also meant that all their previous efforts would be ruined in an instant. This was not something Yang Qindong could accept. In order to prevent things from developing in this direction, he had to attack fiercely and try to take down the Timur Empire in the shortest time possible. The Timur Empire's environment and landscape were very complicated. There were many deserts, and there were very few places that were suitable for cavalry to fight. It was completely different from the time when they were dealing with the Golden Horde, where both sides appeared in a decisive battle. That was how they achieved victory in the shortest time possible. Shaking his head, he carefully looked at the map and some information, but he could not find a place or opportunity for the decisive battle. Yang Qindong could not help but sigh. It seems that we can only push forward slowly. I hope that Tianhu and the others can succeed and join forces with the East Army to solve the urgent need for provisions. In the 15th century, most of the land of the Kazakh Khanate was separated from the Golden Horde and became part of the Yuebi Khanate. Later, some tribes broke away from the Yuebi Khanate's rule and were called escapees, and gradually formed the Kazakh people. The Kazakh Khanate's territory was inhabited by nomadic Turkic people. It was because of this that they were a people that could fight and were also a people that liked to fight. The capital, Akamo, was also built more than a decade ago. Although it was called a city, it was actually just a slightly larger market. There were some walls made of earth around the city. They were not high, only about 1 zhang high. In the end, it was just for show. Because if a war really broke out, they did not expect to rely on these walls to defend anything. At that time, they would rush out on horseback with all of their belongings. This also allowed them to move faster. Unless they were completely surrounded, it would be very difficult to eliminate them. It was because of this that the 5-star army on the East Front could not find the main force to engage in a decisive battle. More often than not, when they received the news, they would rush over empty-handed. In the end, they could only move forward bit by bit and were unable to join forces with Yang Qindong on the West Front. Relying on this kind of fast-moving method, the Kazakh Khanate's Jainurbek Khan was not afraid of the 5-star army's attack. As long as he received the news, he would immediately leave. When the other side missed, he would consider cutting off the 5-star army's supply line, thus forcing the other side to retreat and give up the territory that they had just occupied. This kind of strategy gave the 5-star army an endless headache. Before they could eliminate the other side's strength, it was impossible for them to occupy those so-called earth walls. This was because unless they were heavily guarded, they would face the other side's counterattack at any time. Thus, there was the possibility of being swallowed up. This was the biggest problem in dealing with the Kazakh Khanate. The five-star army had outstanding bravery and elite cavalry, but they were still unable to deal with the other side. And all of this would change with the appearance of the 1st Cavalry Division led by Tian Hu. With Wang Yanhang's help, the more than 40,000 brave warriors of the 1st Heavenly Cavalry Army set out from the Ilkhanate's capital, Tabuli Tucheng, making a detour around the Timur Empire's territory, quietly cutting into the Kazakh Khanate's rear. Wang Yanhang was worthy of being a descendant of the Wanyan clan. He was extremely familiar with the situation in this area. The path that he pointed out was indeed unknown. Along the way, they didn't encounter any traces of enemies. According to what he said, they would be able to enter the Kazakh Khanate's territory in at most half a month. Then, they would be able to reach Akamo city in 10 days. Then, they would be able to secretly deal a fierce blow to Janabek Khan and eliminate as much of the other side's strength as possible. The next 25 days would be the most crucial period. Their tracks absolutely couldn't be discovered. For this reason, Tian Hu took the initiative to send a telegram to Yang Qindong, requesting the 6th young master's help and cooperation. This was because apart from being discovered by the Kazakh cavalry, Tian Hu was also worried that they would be discovered by the Timur Empire's cavalry. After all, that Mandaratl wasn't a good person. Once he discovered their tracks, he feared that the entire 1st Cavalry Division would face the grim situation of being surrounded from all sides. After receiving Tian Hu's telegram, Yang Qindong ordered the army to attack from all sides in order to divert Mandaratl's attention. At the same time, all of the Air Force's hot air balloons were deployed as guides. In other words, once the hot air balloons discovered the target, they could also drop explosive packs from the air before the 5-star army's cavalry arrived. In short, they couldn't let the Timur Empire's soldiers be idle. They had to create a feeling of war everywhere. This way, they wouldn't have the time to care about anything else. This would create an even more favorable situation for the 1st Cavalry Division to advance. The 5-star army launched a frenzied attack. Almost every day, there would be large and small-scale battles. Under Mandaratl's command, the 250,000 Timur Empire's cavalry also launched multiple attacks. Using their understanding of the environment, they started a game of hide-and-seek with the 5-star army. They were very skilled in using Sun Tzu's art of wars. When the enemy advances, I will retreat. When the enemy retreats, I will disturb them. Just like that, half a month passed. The 5-star army launched many attacks, but the results were few and far between. The army was also exhausted. Yang Qindong finally received a telegram from Tian Hu. They had successfully passed through the Timur Empire and entered the Kazakh region. He ordered the army to retreat and find a safe place to rest and reorganize. After entering the Timur Empire, the 5-star army's first attack ended. When the news of them stopping the attack reached the capital, Ahmet Khan Amur's face was beaming with joy. His frowning face for the past few months was swept away and he cheered a few times. On the same night, the entire capital fell into a carnival. Especially great General Mandaratl, everyone killed sheep, ate meat, drank wine, and played all night. In contrast, the atmosphere in the 5-star army's camps was somewhat gloomy. After attacking for half a month, the number of enemies destroyed was not even 10,000 cavalry. Moreover, the other side was already prepared. They had scorched the walls and cleared the field, so there was no harvest in terms of food. This was naturally rare for the 5-star army. In the past, as long as they decided to attack, they would definitely gain a lot. This time, it was the 6th young master who personally gave the order, but they still got such a result. Many people couldn't accept it. In the end, they could only comfort themselves with the excuse that even immortals would take a nap, and the 6th young master wouldn't be too difficult. Beta Persei had already returned to Yang Qindong's side with the Black Cavalry. In the past half a month, he had been tormenting himself a lot, but unfortunately, he couldn't touch the enemy's main force at all. When he finally found the enemy's figure, the enemy would drill into the mountains, making it impossible for him to chase after them. Beta Persei didn't like this kind of fighting method where he couldn't find an opponent at all. In the end, he had no choice but to return to Yang Qindong's side. As soon as he returned, he heard the voices of the soldiers below. There were actually people who dared to doubt the young master. This was something that Beta Persei couldn't tolerate. He secretly called Xiu Vi, Dao Shao, Ba Dao Jiang, and the other leaders of the Black Cavalry, and asked them to find those who were suspicious. He wanted to teach a few of them a lesson and punish them according to the law. But for some reason, Yang Qindong found out about this matter. He called the Black Cavalry and stopped them in public. Their mouths are on other people's bodies. We can't interfere with what they think. As long as it doesn't affect the morale of the army, we don't need to care. At least, whether they are right or not depends on the final result. Don't worry. Chapter 1508. Yang Qindong said these words so confidently, but when they fell into the ears of Beta Persei and the others, they had no choice but to suppress the anger in their hearts. But at the same time, this confidence infected them. The matter of Tianhu entering the Kazakh Khanate is top secret. In order to prevent it from being leaked, Yang Qindong didn't even tell Beta Persei about it. It's not that he doesn't trust them, but he's worried that after telling them, these people will talk about it in a moment of happiness. If this news gets out, it will be bad. Since it's easy to cause all kinds of problems, it's better not to say it. It just so happens that he also took this opportunity to see what kind of performance the other senior generals in the army will have. If someone is full of complaints because of a moment of dissatisfaction, or even has other ideas, it's tantamount to a pleasant surprise, and he can get rid of such a black sheep. For this reason, a total of 120 intelligence personnel were secretly sent to the various armies and began to investigate the reaction of all sides. Time passed day by day like this. 4 days later, outside the general's mansion in Herat City, Chuishij came with 2 jonins to collect some things. Before the war began, they were sent here to carry out the decapitation operation and get rid of the great enemy, Mandaratu. But from the moment he received this task, Chuishij knew that this task is not easy to complete, or even impossible to complete. However, even though he knew this, he still had to come because this was Yang Qindong's intention. No matter what kind of thoughts this Han held, since he had spoken, he had to carry it out. Just like Yang Qindong never believes in aliens, Chuishij also doesn't completely believe in Yang Qindong. Although all the training costs are now paid by Yang Qindong, in fact, the two sides are more of a cooperative relationship. After all, ninjas have been taught for hundreds of years. In their bones, the Japanese Empire is their home, their root. Now they have to live for the people who once destroyed their roots, which is a bit unacceptable from a psychological point of view. On this point, not only was Chushi aware of it, he believed that the other 2 special ninja brothers, Kitamura and Yui Suzuki, were also aware of it. The 3 of them had made a lot of preparations for this. For example, they had secretly accumulated money and made all sorts of preparations to leave the 5-star army. It had to be said that in some aspects, Yang Qindong was very generous. In order to make the ninjas work for him, any materials they request every month will be fully satisfied. Every time he was able to save 20%, it was not a small fortune. Over time, he had accumulated quite a lot over the past few years. Just as he was about to become independent, Blowing Stone received the order to be transferred to the front lines. Because he wasn't fully prepared, Blowing Stone had to say goodbye to his 2 brothers and come here. The last time he was ordered to protect Yang Qindong, Blowing Stone wanted to see if he could use Ivan to kill Yang Qindong. Unfortunately, Ivan was an impulsive young man, he wasn't fully prepared. Blowing Stone thought that even if he wanted to go easy on Yang Qindong, he wouldn't be able to hurt Yang Qindong. This is because they know that in terms of individual combat power, King Wunan of Damyang is even more abnormal. Although they have never seen him in action, they heard that even the strongest black cavalry can't be his opponent. This can be seen from Yang Qindong's disappearance and the defeat of Yeshin's 30,000 Walla army. This person clearly has a backup plan, in other words, he doesn't fully trust him. Thinking about how he almost believed that this was a good opportunity to make a move, Blowing Stone couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. Of course, Blowing Stone didn't know that the reason why Yes Han lost was because he lost to Daikara, not because Yang Qindong was prepared. Not knowing the truth, Blowing Stone thought that he didn't have Yang Qindong's trust at all. Because of this, he also had other thoughts about this mission. In his opinion, this was the method of that person driving the wolf to devour the tiger. To put it bluntly, if the assassination was successful, it would be best. It would help him complete the mission, but if Mandolatu really died, as the murderer, it would be difficult for Blowing Stone to escape Herat. In the end, he couldn't avoid death. On the other hand, if the assassination didn't succeed, it would be difficult for him to escape. In the end, he would still die. If that was the case, Yang Qindong wouldn't be sad, because in that person's eyes, he was someone who couldn't be trusted. If he died, then he died. Therefore, this mission was basically a dilemma. If he made a move, he would die, but if he didn't, he would be disobeying orders. Death was the only option, and this feeling made Blowing Stone very uncomfortable. He couldn't help but think of that person, the person who secretly contacted them. Maybe he should consider cooperating with that person, at least the result can't be worse, right? If their leader wasn't Yang Qindong, then Blowing Stone wouldn't have so much pressure. Others can't control his own fate. Thinking of the words that the man had hinted at, Blowing Stone had an idea. At this time, they just walked around the general's mansion, and Blowing Stone finally said, "The situation is clear, is there any problem if we do it tonight?" "No problem." The two behind him replied softly. "Very good." When Blowing Stone said this sentence, there was a trace of unbearable expression on his face. Once the fight starts, these two ninjas who have followed him for many years won't live past tonight. But even if he knows this, he can't say anything. Just like how Yang Qindong doesn't easily trust others, he also doesn't dare to trust the ninjas under him. Who knows if they have been bribed by Yang Qindong all this time? Ninjas often choose a dark and windy night to make a move, which is more conducive to their actions. Tonight is a good night, because of the clouds, there is no moonlight. And this is a good opportunity for the ninjas to show their strength. In the general's mansion, Mandolatu was standing in front of the map in his study. Others are immersed in the great joy of defeating the 5-star army at the moment, but as the commander of the army, he didn't get carried away by the victory. Speaking of which, in this half-a-month's battle, the Timur cavalry did not gain any advantage. Instead, they lost more than 8,000 cavalry. On the contrary, according to the information they received, they only killed less than 1,000 soldiers of the 5th Astral Corps. This is a complete defeat. It was only because the 5-star army had become a scourge in everyone's eyes. Therefore, in many people's eyes, if they could stall the 5-star army until they couldn't win, it would be their victory. That was why there was this celebration. This battle made Mandolatu more aware of the strength and sharpness of the 5-star army. But at the same time, it also made him feel that something is wrong. He had studied the past of the 5-star army before. This was an army that always had a clear goal when they attacked. Why would they fight randomly this time? The battle that had lasted for half a month seemed to be completely random. Even if it was him, he wouldn't command such a chaotic battle. At least, they would try to test it, for example, if a lone army went deep into the capital to see if there's an opportunity to take the head of a general and so on. But the 5-star army didn't do this at all, they just kept attacking, retreating, and advancing. This made Mandolatu very puzzled, and he began to reflect on whether he missed something. Or the reason why the 5-star army did this is to hide something. But what are they trying to hide? This is the so-called abnormal thing, there must be a demon. The 5-star army doesn't play by the rules, this is what Mandolatu can't figure out. And if he can't figure out the situation of the other side, then it's not impossible for him to suffer a loss, or even die. Standing in front of the map, Mandolatu didn't move for a long time, he was still thinking about any possibilities. He didn't believe that the commander of the Ross Principality, who defeated the Golden Horde, would make such a stupid move and attack without a goal. Often, the more aimless the attack, the more likely it is that he is carrying out a secret plan. But what is this plan? On the map, Manjilatul slowly moved. Unconsciously, he looked at the Kazakh Khanate to the northwest of the Timur Empire. He seemed to have thought of something. His hand involuntarily moved towards that direction on the map. Assassins, protect the general. It was at this moment that a sudden voice broke Manjilatul's train of thought, causing his original inspiration to disappear completely. It was completely disrupted by the shouts outside the door, and it disappeared without a trace. Outside the door, the ninjas finally made their move. But just like what Yushi had imagined before, as an existence second only to Great Khan Amur in the Timur Empire, Manjilatul's safety was naturally the top priority, so how could he be easily assassinated? The 50 ninjas just arrived at the inner courtyard, but they were discovered by the guards in charge of the general's safety. In a short period of time, the entire inner courtyard was brightly lit. In such an environment, it was no different from daytime. Without the darkness that the ninjas relied on, they were like tigers with their teeth pulled out. They lacked a deadly weapon to deal with the enemy. The 50 ninjas were surrounded in all corners, but none of them were waiting for death. This may have something to do with the education they have been receiving. Even if they die, they will die on the way, and they will not choose to surrender. Without the cover of darkness, the ability shown by these ninjas is equivalent to ordinary elite soldiers. Under the siege of more and more Mongolian soldiers, one ninja after another died tragically in the inner courtyard. Some ninjas even closed their eyes after being stabbed several times. Chapter 1509. In a small courtyard on a street not far from the general's mansion, a black shadow wearing a black suit was sitting there with his eyes closed. He was one of the special ninjas of the Wu province. Just a moment ago, he had led 50 ninjas to sneak out of the great general's mansion. But unknowingly, he had retreated. Yes, he had betrayed his ninjas in order to save his own life. And all of this was not because he was afraid of death, but because he had a greater goal to achieve, such as the independence of the ninjas. In order to achieve this goal, he did not hesitate to sacrifice the lives of these 50 ninjas. And from this moment on, he would temporarily disappear from everyone's sight. He would look for that person, the person who had given them the hint. Perhaps that person was the only hope for them to escape from the great general's control and regain their freedom. In the great general's mansion, the assassination was over after half an hour. All of the ninjas were killed, and the Mongolian army had paid a price of 130 people. From this, it could be seen that the individual combat strength of a ninja was still very strong. Even if they were surrounded, even if they could not show their best side, they still managed to injure their opponents. Manjilatul was inspecting the corpses on the ground under the close protection of his personal guards. After the experienced people confirmed that these were the legendary ninjas of the Japanese Empire, there was not a trace of fear on Manjilatul's face. Instead, he laughed as if he had survived a disaster. He finally figured out why the 5-star army had done so much useless work for half a month. It turned out that this was their purpose, it was to make him relax his vigilance and create an opportunity for these ninjas. Fortunately, he had always been careful and cautious, so he was spared. As if he had finally figured out the matter, Manjilatul's face was full of a sense of relief. He wanted to see what tricks the 5-star army had up their sleeves. At the same time, he wanted to hang the corpses of these assassins on the city wall. He wanted to let everyone know that the Han people had tried to assassinate him. He wanted everyone to know that he, Manjilatul, was not afraid of being beaten, and he could not be killed. The personal guards moved quickly. In just the morning, the corpses of the 50 ninjas were hung on the city wall for all the Mongolians to see. Among them were members of Yang Xie's intelligence department. They quickly sent the news back by telegram and asked for instructions on what to do next. Yang Qindong was not surprised when he heard the news. If Manjilatul could be killed so easily, then he wouldn't be worthy of being the 5-star army's opponent. Let them investigate. Check all the deceased and record their appearances and specific numbers. They are all heroes. If they have family members, they should be compensated generously. This matter seemed to have passed just like that. In order to express his anger, Yang Qindong even intentionally sent out 5,000 cavalrymen to search for the main force of the Mongolian cavalrymen, intending to have a decisive battle. Unfortunately, even though Manchuruta was prepared, he still couldn't find anything. On the other hand, the five-star army didn't dare to advance too far due to the lack of food. In the end, they had no choice but to retreat. Along the way from the Golden Horde, they had already used up 70% of the food they brought. With less than 30% left, before new food arrived, it was impossible for the army to advance without a goal. Unless they could find the main force of the Mongol army and fight them, or they had new rations to replenish their supplies, the five-star legion could only retreat from here and find a way out. The battlefield fell into a stalemate. Mando Latu looked at this scene silently. He even had a bold idea. Before winter came, if the five-star army still held on and didn't retreat, he would launch a large-scale counterattack. He wanted to see what kind of fighting strength an army without food and soldiers without enough to eat could have. On the battlefield, the five-star army's main force seemed to have fallen into a passive state. With the cooperation of Wang Yanhong, Tian who finally brought the main force of the World Cavalry Army to the outskirts of the Kazakh capital, Akhmo. On a nearby hill, Tian who used his binoculars and could already see the short earthen walls. He could also see many Mongolian citizens carrying out various transactions within the walls. This is the capital of Kazakh. Tian Huyu asked with a hint of doubt when he saw how simple and crude everything was. In fact, it wasn't even as good as a village in Crimson City. This was of course not a question, but a sigh. Wang Yanhong saw this and didn't answer this question. Instead, he lowered his head in shame. Evidently, he also felt a bit embarrassed. After all, being poor wasn't something to be proud of. Alright, don't be sad. Believe me, once the people of your Wanyan clan become the people of our Yang family, their lives will certainly become better and better. There will be earth-shaking changes. At that time, your clansmen will thank you for generations. Hee hee. Feeling the change in Wang Yanhong's mood, Tian who patted the latter's shoulder to comfort him. Then he said to the 4 division commanders who came with him, "Have you all seen the terrain clearly? Remember it well. We will have a meeting when we go back. Tonight, we will launch the attack." When he said this, Tian who also felt a bit relieved. This operation is a bit risky. Now that I think about it, I only listened to Wang Yanhong's side of the story. If something goes wrong, I'm afraid that the entire No. 1 Cavalry Army will suffer a heavy loss. It's not an exaggeration to say that the 4 divisions and I might even lose our lives here. Fortunately, Wang Yanhong didn't disappoint him. The matter was finally completed. The target was right in front of him, and he didn't show any signs of vigilance. This made Tian Hu very confident about the next attack plan. After bringing the 4 division commanders back to the camp 12 miles away, Tian Hu immediately ordered all the soldiers to take out all the food and finish it in one meal. This was to ensure that they had enough energy to complete the mission. In fact, even if they took out all the food, they would only be 70% full. After running continuously for such a long time, the World Cavalry Army's rations had already been depleted. This was the importance of logistics in a war. Since Yang Qindong established the 5-star army, he had never been so worried about food. In the past, when deciding where to send troops, he would always prepare enough rations in advance. In the process of battle, the rations would be continuously delivered through various channels. Even when they were fighting against the Golden Horde and the Ross Duchy, there were still millions of people working hard. Countless military provisions were sent from the Yang's provinces to the 3 eastern provinces, and then from there to the far eastern province. It seemed that Yang Qindong's war was like a hot knife through butter. But in reality, the credit of the logistics personnel couldn't be less. It was because of the logistics that the soldiers at the front lines could fight the enemy without worry. They didn't have to worry about not having food to eat, clothes to wear if they were cold, or medicine to use if they were injured. But when they entered the Ilkhanate from Eastern Europe, the five-star army's pace was a little too big. Along the way, many places only surrendered and weren't destroyed. Naturally, they weren't considered Yang Xie's territory. And it was because of the instability of their retreat that when the five-star army's main force left, they quickly went back on their words and didn't recognize Yang Xie as their sovereign state. At this time, it was impossible to transport rations from there. If they insisted on doing so, they were afraid that no matter how much they transported, they would be robbed. In the end, not a single grain of rice would fall into the hands of the five-star army. And it was precisely because the rations were cut off that Mandolatu confidently faced the five-star army and played guerrilla warfare. The five-star army couldn't find their main force and didn't know where the enemy's main cavalry was. They didn't dare to advance rashly. Otherwise, it would be easy for their retreat to be cut off and they would be surrounded one by one. The five-star army was strong, and their combat power was incomparable to that of an ordinary army. They even had a pure firearms unit like the Cold Front. If they faced the enemy head-on, they wouldn't be afraid of any enemy. But if the enemy used a sneak attack and made use of the terrain to launch a sudden attack, the five-star army wouldn't be able to withstand it. Especially in a situation where they were severely lacking in rations, the more they moved, the more they would consume. It was because of this that Yang Qindong placed all his hopes on Tian Hu's world's first cavalry army. If they couldn't break through this time, then they would have to retreat without accomplishing anything. How could Tian Hu not understand this? After being a high-ranking officer for so many years, he still had some foresight. Thus, he was even more clear about the importance of this mission. After returning to the camp, he called for the 4 division commanders. The 5 of them discussed for more than 2 hours and finally came up with the most reliable method of attack. In summary, they had to take down Akamo City and lure the enemy back for reinforcements. This would open up a path and opportunity for the five-star army's main force on the Eastern Front. As long as they could join forces with the five-star army on the Eastern Front, it would be equivalent to having a stable route for the transportation of rations. They could also use this route to continuously send in supplies needed for war. Regarding this point, Yang Qindong had already sent a telegram to the various armies on the Eastern Front 25 days ago to let them prepare. For division commanders, the 6th young master is watching us. The entire army is watching us. Next, it's time for the world's first cavalry army to perform. Remember, this time, not only do we have to take down Akamo City, we also have to open up a safe route to the east. This mission will be handed over to the 2nd and 3rd Division. Now, as the commander, I give you the authority to act as you see fit. If you encounter anyone who doesn't cooperate, you can end it on your own. You can kill without mercy and don't have to worry about anyone coming after you. If necessary, you can build a few more temples to warn others. As he spoke, Tian Hu's body emitted a murderous aura. Chapter 15:10. 2nd Division's Commander Lu Duo and 3rd Division's Commander Hubo stood up and stood at attention. Rest assured, Commander. We guarantee that we will complete the mission. We promise to open the passage as soon as possible and meet up with our main forces in the east. Very good. Everyone, go and prepare. Tian Hu nodded in satisfaction. He was full of confidence in his cavalry. For hours after the meeting, more than 40,000 five-star army cavalrymen set off. They were only 12 kilometers away from their target. They did not take any measures to conceal themselves. After the order was given, the 1st Division's commander Temu took the lead and attacked. For the world's #1 cavalry army, who were proficient in archery and horse riding, a distance of 12 li was nothing. They could guarantee that even if they were discovered by the enemy, they would not give the enemy any time to prepare for defense. In Akamo City. Inside a huge yurt, this was Janabek Khan's residence. Compared to the previous days, his emotions were much more stable. This was because Mendolatu had stopped the five-star army's attack on the Western Front. It was already the beginning of July. They only needed to hold on for 2 more months before winter arrived. If the 5-star army still couldn't build up their defenses, then they could only retreat. This would give them time to rest and recuperate. Although it was not a victory, since they could stop the 5-star army's first attack, who could guarantee that they would not be able to stop the second? This at least gave the Khanate's coalition army, which had been losing, hope. It had a strong effect on the army's morale. This was something that could not be bought with money. Thinking that it would not be long before the 5-star army left dejectedly, Janabek Khan had a smile on his face even when he was sleeping. And all of this disappeared because of the sudden tremors that came from the ground. The smile would never appear again. Report. Enemy attack. Enemy attack. The scouts on the periphery finally discovered the traces of the 5-star army. However, just as Tian who had predicted, the speed of the 5-star army's cavalry was simply too fast. By the time the scout returned with the news, the vanguard of the 1st Division had already arrived outside the city. They were only a stone's throw away from the earth wall. The scout's shout attracted the counterattack of the 500 Kazakh cavalrymen who were on night duty. They all came to the back of the earthen wall and used it as cover to shoot arrows outside. But to the brave warriors of the world's #1 cavalry army who were like ferocious tigers descending from the mountains, they were completely ignored. In addition, in the dark night, vision was limited to begin with. Many arrows were released, but they were all off target. Not many soldiers of the 5-star army were injured. The earthen walls were destroyed by the prepared soldiers of the 5-star army using the huge logs they brought. Without the protection of the earthen wall, the entire city of Akamo was defenseless in front of the 5-star army soldiers. Soon after, the sound of countless armored cavalrymen could be heard. At this time, Janabek Khan had just crawled out of his bed. When he heard the news of the 5-star army's attack from his personal guards, his eyes widened in disbelief. How could the 5-star army appear here? The Ili Empire to the east and the Timur Empire to the west. How did the 5-star army bypass them and arrive in front of him? What was going on? Could it be that these cavalrymen flew here? With all kinds of puzzlement in his heart, Janabek Khan escaped under the protection of his personal guards 15 minutes before the arrival of the 5-star army. Because he left in a hurry, he did not have time to take many things with him. Even his blankets still had a trace of warmth. The 1st Division's commander, Temur, was the first to rush into the Khan's tent. When he saw that there was no one there, he strode forward and touched the blanket. He frowned and said, "It's still warm. What a pity." Even the great Khan had fled without any resistance or counterattack, not to mention the Kazakh cavalry in the city. There were less than 10,000 of them, and in less than 2 hours of fighting in front of the more than 40,000 ferocious soldiers of the world's #1 cavalry army, they either died, fled, or surrendered. In the end, the 80,000 Mongolian civilians in the city were all captured and enslaved by the 5-star army. The battle went very smoothly. When Tian Hu walked into the Khan's tent, he was in high spirits. As he walked, he ordered, "Immediately find all the food in the city. Let the 2nd Division and the 3rd Division eat first. After that, let them set out the day after tomorrow. We must take advantage of the time when the enemy is unprepared to kill our way out. Also, call the 1st Division and the 4th Division over. We also need to discuss the issue of defending the city. This earthen wall is really not sturdy. We must immediately rebuild it and use everything we can, including the civilians in the city to dig trenches. No matter what, before the army arrives, we must be nailed here like a nail." When he said this, Tian Hu's eyes were filled with determination. If the surprise attack on Akmo was the first step to success, then defending this place was the second step. It was also the most difficult step. Tian Hu could even imagine that once the enemy knew that there was such a nail in their heart, they would not be able to resist pulling it out. When Akmo fell, Janabek Khan only managed to escape with less than 1,000 Kazakh cavalry. When the news began to spread, Mendolato, who heard the news, immediately smashed the desk in front of him and shouted angrily, "Trash, a bunch of trash." After venting his anger, Mendolato calmed down and felt the threat. He did not know how the 5-star army had bypassed his front line. He had to find a way to eliminate them. He absolutely could not tolerate a fierce tiger lying by his side. He also could not allow the 5-star army on the east and west to converge. Otherwise, it would be the beginning of a disaster. At this moment, Mendelatu finally understood that the crazy and brainless attacks of the 5th Star Army in the past half a month were not to cover up those killers, but to attract his attention so that the cavalry of the 5th Star Army could pass right under his nose. It had to be said that even though he was very careful, he was still careless and fell into the 5-Star Army's trap. Or it could be said that he fell into the trap of King Wunan of Damyang. Men, send out 80,000 cavalry. No matter what, we must capture Akmo City and kill all the 5-Star Army's cavalry there. Kill them all. After enduring for so long, Manjaladal finally decided to reveal his fangs. His first target was the world's first cavalry army that was nailed into Akmo City like a nail. Once this nail was pulled out, the next target would be the 20,000-strong 5-Star Army's cavalry that was about to attack from behind and join the 5-Star Army on the east front. Manjaladal did not believe that it was only 20,000 cavalry. Could they really overturn the heavens? The same news also spread to the 5-Star Army's camp on the west front. At this moment, everyone knew that the 6th young master's actions had such a deep meaning. Some of the officers who had complained could not help but feel ashamed. For this reason, many officers actually knelt in front of the main tent and apologized to Yang Qindong in person. In response, Yang Qindong only arranged for Beta Persei to come forward and admonish them. He had already investigated and found that these complaining officers had the intention of thinking for the army. No one had any ulterior motives because of this. This did not cross his bottom line, so naturally, he would not punish them too harshly. This was probably the effect of Gray's death. Although there were quite a few people who suspected that Yang Qindong was the culprit behind Gray's death, after considering that he had indeed done something that was not allowed by military discipline, coupled with his frightening arrogance in the later stages of his life, such a person's death was not worth pitying. Furthermore, although Gray had died, he had died fighting for the 5-Star Army in name. As a result, his family had received quite a bit of compensation. With this, they had both money and face, and no one would step forward to seek justice for them. On the contrary, what everyone needed to consider was that they could not easily make mistakes in their work in the future. For this reason, many officers who joined the army later went to check the military discipline of the 5-Star Army. This was very gratifying. Ely County. King Baoli's face was full of worry, and it lingered for a long time. Ever since his prime minister, Syed Ali Alip, had suddenly disappeared, all the pressure had been placed on him. When the military matters, the local matters, and the pressure exerted by some nobles all came pressing down on him, he quickly had a lot of white hair on his head, and he looked much older. Regardless of whether it was day or night, he dealt with all kinds of matters. However, not only did he not manage to deal with them well, there were more and more of them. This was especially so when he heard that the 5-Star Army had entered his territory from the Kazakh Khanate. He felt that the pressure was about to completely crush him to the ground. Originally, he thought that with the appearance of the Timur Empire's Great Khan, the Khanates would temporarily be united, and more Khanate alliance cavalry would enter his territory. His country would be saved. However, from the looks of it, he had underestimated the 5-Star Army. Or, it could be said that he had overestimated the so-called Invincible Khanate Alliance. Truly a bunch of trash. He had the same sigh as Mandula Tuesday. When he heard that the 5-Star Army only had 20,000 cavalrymen, they had chased Khan Janirb all over the place, causing them to lose most of their territory in a short period of time. When the 5-Star Army finally arrived behind him, King Baoli wanted to kill this so-called Great Khan of the Kazakh Khanate. What was the point of having a Great Khan who could not even stop the 20,000 cavalrymen of the 5-Star Army? Chapter 1511. Sighs were sighs, and curses were curses. He knew that the 5-Star Army on the Eastern Front was responding to the 20,000 cavalrymen. They were trying to open up a path by attacking from both sides. The five-star army on the Eastern Front was attacking ferociously, and their momentum was even more powerful than a few days ago. The five-star army on the Eastern Front was responding to the 20,000 cavalrymen. They were trying to open up a path by attacking from both sides. There are hundreds of thousands of cavalrymen here. Do you think you can open it just because you want to? Bao Lide's face was filled with confidence when he thought of the 10-kilometer-long trench outside the city that was enough to stop the five-star army's attack. It was also because of this trench that the five-star legion's cavalry couldn't charge forward at all, which was why they were able to hold off the enemy for so long. Bao Lide was confident that he would be able to hold off the main force of the five-star legion this time. As long as he could hold off this wave of attacks, he believed that the other Kaganates wouldn't just ignore the 20,000 enemy cavalry that appeared behind them. Bao Lide was confident that he could defend Ali Mali city. However, what he didn't know was that one of his generals, Wu Liji, was secretly meeting with an old friend. At this moment, he was struggling with whether to surrender or not. When Wu Liji's old friend, dressed in a black robe, appeared in his residence, the great general was given a huge fright. After the shock, he walked over with a face full of joy. "Prime Minister, where have you been these past few years? We missed you so much." That's right, the person who came was Prime Minister Ali Pu. It had been almost 4 years since Yang Qindong had sent people to rob him. During this time, he had been under the surveillance of intelligence personnel. He had been to Yang Xie's Qiqian city, Shishir, and other provinces. It could be said that he had been moving around without stopping. These years of traveling had greatly broadened his horizons. Just like what Yang Qindong had said when he met him secretly, his so-called governance was just child's play. Under his governance, the nobles would still be high and mighty, and the common people would still live a life without hunger. Apu had once scoffed at this, thinking that Yang Qindong was just a braggart. At least from what he knew of history, there had never been any nation or country that could eliminate the privileges of the rich and powerful and allow all the ordinary people to live a prosperous life. For example, they did not lack food, clothes, and houses. In his opinion, no one could do this. Anyone who could make 50% of the people live such a life would be a great ruler. If he could make 60% of the people reach this standard, then he would be a great emperor. If he could make 70% of the people reach this standard, then he would not even dare to think about it. However, after visiting for 4 years, he found that Yang Qindong was not just bragging. Instead, he really did what he said. Although the common people's wealth did not reach 100%, it was at least 80%. Moreover, this percentage was still increasing year by year. In other words, as long as they were hard-working people, dutiful people, and people who were willing to work hard, they would be able to live a prosperous life. This was something that he didn't even dare to think about before. Now, someone had actually realized it and even let him see it. This had greatly affected him. How he wished that the common people of his country could also live such a life. That way, even if he died immediately, it would be worth it. But in his heart, he knew very well that this was impossible. Not to mention other things, just the privileges of the rich and powerful were something that no one could abolish. If someone really did this, they would be overthrown by the rich and powerful. Even if he and the king worked together, they would not be able to do it. Even so, a bold idea appeared in his mind. If he could not do it, he might as well give it to someone else, such as the leader of Yang Xie, Yang Qindong. After having this idea, Apu quickly shook his head, wanting to suppress it. Wasn't this the same as selling out his country? Wasn't this the same as giving his country to someone else? This was the act of a traitor. Apu wanted to suppress this sudden thought, but after it appeared, he discovered that it wasn't something he could suppress even if he wanted to. This was especially so when he visited other provinces under Yang Xie. He saw many common people who had migrated from other places and lived with them. When he asked them whether they still remembered where they were from, whether they wanted to return to their homeland, or whether they wanted to rebuild their country, the answers he received were the same. Of course I want to go home. After all, it's my homeland. But if I have to live a life where I can't eat or wear clothes, I'd rather stay here. Here, my family and I lived a good life. We didn't have to worry about our next meal, nor did we have to worry about our wealth being swallowed by the rich and powerful. We also didn't have to worry about our own safety and whether or not enemies would suddenly attack. This is the life I want. As for the past, forget about it. Just treat it as a memory. That's right, it's a painful memory. When this answer did not come from one person, but from 10 people, at least 9.5 gave the same answer. Apu knew that the common people's eyes were clear, and Yang Qindong's actions were correct. If it was wrong, why would the common people speak up for him? Why would he receive the support of the common people? Why would the common people be truly satisfied to the point where they would forget their homeland and their country? After slowly going from not understanding to understanding, Apu began to believe in his thoughts. Yang Qindong was correct, and this method could also be applied to his country. Although the price he had to pay was the loss of his royal authority, compared to the common people being able to live a better life, it was all worth it. Back then, wasn't his wish to let the common people live a better life? For this, he swore that he would sacrifice everything, including himself. Since there was such an opportunity, what was he waiting for? 4 years later, Apu finally thought it through and sent a telegram to Yang Qindong. He explained his views and thoughts, and was willing to pay any price. He wanted to do something for this matter. Yang Qindong was naturally very happy that Apu was able to think this through. This was also one of the important reasons why he wanted to capture Apu. He immediately arranged for people to escort Apu to the eastern front lines, preparing to return. After receiving the order, the commander of the foreign army, Bai Shuang, received the order and Apu appeared in front of Wu Liji. When he entered the city, even though Apu was in a carriage, he could still see the current situation of the common people through the window. Compared to 4 years ago, the common people here were even more bitter. They were all thin and sallow, and some could even be blown away by a gust of wind. Their eyes were empty and lifeless, as if they were walking corpses. They had no aspirations, no dreams, and no expectations for tomorrow. Compared to the common people of Yangxia, they were all full of energy, and their bodies were broad and strong. They were like people from 2 different worlds. This also strengthened Apu's thoughts. He also hoped that the common people here could enjoy the same treatment as the common people of the other provinces of Yangxia. That's right, in Yang Qindong's words, it was called liberation. It was liberation, it had to be liberation. With this firm thought, Apu met Wu Liji and saw the other party's enthusiasm. Speaking of which, for Wu Liji to have his current status, it was naturally because of King Boride's approval, but it was more because of Apu's recommendation and promotion. In a sense, he was the one who recognized Wu Liji. It was for this reason that the first person Apu chose to meet was Wu Liji. He firmly believed that even if Wu Liji didn't agree with his point of view, he wouldn't betray him. Seeing Wu Liji's excited expression, Apu reached out and patted him on the shoulder. General Wu Liji, is there a safe place? I have something to say to you in private. Oh, there is, please come with me. Wu Liji's expression instantly became much more solemn. He already had a vague feeling in his heart. The two soon appeared in a secret room in the residence. Without permission, no one was allowed to approach this place. Otherwise, Wu Liji's personal guards would kill them for threatening the general's safety. In the quiet secret room, the two sat facing each other. After Wu Liji poured a cup of tea, Apu slowly opened his mouth and gave a general account of his 4 years of disappearance. Wu Liji listened attentively. He was very curious about the 5-star army. He also wanted to see what kind of power could cultivate such a powerful cavalry. Could it be that the Han people were so powerful that they were invincible? Were they so powerful that they changed their strategy? All of this was explained by Apu's words. It turned out that the relationship between Wunan Wang of the Great Ming Dynasty and the Great Ming Dynasty was not subordinate to each other. Instead, he belonged to an emerging force. No wonder this was the case. In a sense, Yang Qindong was equivalent to a founding monarch. He belonged to a new power that was constantly developing and expanding based on the Great Ming's borders. In Yang Xie's power, there were no so-called nobles and there were no restraints. Once they wanted to do something, they could wholeheartedly devote themselves to it and didn't need to think too much. Just this alone was something that the other old powers couldn't compare to. Just the existence of nobles and nobles had dragged down countless people who wanted to rise but couldn't. To make a simple analogy, power and wealth were not concentrated. Most of the land was in the hands of a few influential people, and the lives of the common people were miserable. In such an environment, no matter how good one's ideas were, it would be very difficult to turn them into reality. Chapter 1512. The 5-star army didn't have such concerns right now, but no one could guarantee that they wouldn't in the future. Wu Liji also raised his doubts on this issue. Sir Prime Minister, can this King Wunan of Damyang really eliminate the existence of influential officials? If this is the case, who can guarantee that his position will be stable? Without the support of influential officials, how long can his country last? Does he really have to rely on the common people? Hee hee, what a joke. The common people don't have their own consciousness. Once chaos breaks out, they won't be able to make their own decisions. All they can do is follow the script. Facing Wu Liji's impolite criticism, Alip didn't argue with him. In his opinion, whether or not Yang Qindong really could eliminate the existence of influential officials wasn't important. What was important was that he had already accomplished this. What was important was that the current King Wunan of Damyang was his enemy. What was important was that this King Wunan of Damyang had never shown mercy to his enemies. In this person's eyes, there were only two choices: surrender or be exterminated. There was no such thing as a sovereign state or an auxiliary state. General Wu Liji, if you wish to discuss this matter, there will be plenty of opportunities in the future. Let's talk about the current situation first. Right now, the 5-star army's two armies are about to converge. Moreover, we are doing our best to stop Li Zheng here. Do you think we can stop this great momentum? Facing Alip's sharp question, Wu Liji didn't avoid it. Instead, after thinking for a bit, he replied, this time, we might be able to stop them. However, the next time might not be the case. If the 5-star army is determined to achieve their goal, I believe we won't be able to stop them in the end. Good. Alip nodded in satisfaction. He originally thought that Wu Liji would refuse to admit it out of pride and face. Now that he had admitted to this point, the following words were easy to say. Yes, General Wu Liji's vision is indeed far. Even our so-called Khaganate alliance won't be able to stop the 5-star army's cavalry. Without sufficient financial support, without sufficient rear, food, and reserves, our strength will only grow weaker and weaker. In the end, we will lose everything and be defeated here. In comparison, the 5-star army has an enviable rear. No matter if it is food, military equipment, or soldiers, as long as they want, they can continuously supply us. Even if they eventually exhaust us, they can still exhaust us to death. Since that is the case, why do we have to wait until we can't hold on anymore? Why can't we make a decision earlier? This way, we can sacrifice fewer warriors and commoners. This is a good thing to accumulate merit. Even if we take 10,000 steps back, even if we win this battle, what can we get? The Wunan of the Khaganates of Damyang's territory. If that's the case, our strength will be greatly weakened. Even if the 5-star army doesn't swallow us up, I'm afraid that the nearby Khanate won't let us off. At that time, our citizens will become slaves. Is this what the general wants to see? Of course not. Facing Alip's aggressive questioning, Wu Liji hurriedly denied. Good, since that is the case, then is the general willing to surrender to the 5-star army? Don't worry, I have already spoken to King Wunan of the Great Ming Dynasty. He has also promised that as long as the general is willing to open the passage for the 5-star army to come in, and is willing to surrender and gain military merits, he can guarantee the general's absolute safety and partial rights and interests. At that time, your family will definitely be grateful for the correct choice you made. Many years later, you will also be proud of the choice you made today. Alip finally revealed the reason for his visit. These words were not only for the sake of Wu Liji and his family, but also for the sake of the citizens and warriors of the Kaganates. He didn't want his country to become a sacrifice. If that happened, he wouldn't close his eyes even if he died. Facing Alip's expectant gaze, Wu Liji didn't immediately make a decision. Instead, he asked, "Minister, have you really traveled for 4 years and met countless citizens who surrendered to the 5-star army? Are they really living well?" "Yes, I can swear on my life." Facing this series of questions, Alip nodded solemnly. A glint flashed across his eyes. "All right, since that's the case, I'll do it for the sake of the safety of my people. Lord Prime Minister, just tell me what to do," Wu Liji said with a resolute and decisive tone. Just from this point alone, he was a righteous person with the citizens in his heart. After receiving Wu Liji's affirmation, Alip let out a long sigh of relief. He knew that his mission was half complete. He already had a plan for what to do next. When the time comes, the 5-star army's main force would also cooperate with him. Alip met with Wu Liji in private. Because everything was arranged by Yang Xie's intelligence department, it avoided everyone's eyes and ears, so much so that Bao Lai didn't know about it at all. A day later, he received news that Wu Liji was seriously ill. After so many years of war, countless generals had died. Wu Liji had already secured his position as the #1 general. Now that something was wrong with his body, no matter what, as the king, he had to come and ask about it. 200 palace guards accompanied Bao Lai out of the city and arrived at Wu Liji's mansion. He also met General Korban, the man who was second only to Wu Liji in the army. "Oh, General Korban is here too." Bao Lai raised his head and asked. He nodded as a form of greeting and then walked into the room with only 2 guards. He saw Wu Liji lying on the bed. Wu Liji's face was pale, and he looked seriously ill. There was a person in front of him with his back facing the king, who seemed to be saying something to him. The 2 guards shouted as soon as they entered the room, "His Majesty the King has arrived." Hearing her voice, Wu Liji forced himself to sit up. With his back facing her, he slowly began to turn around. At this moment, Bao Lai's gaze was completely focused on Wu Liji. He didn't notice the person who was halfway through turning around. With a concerned expression, he asked softly, "General Wu Liji, what's wrong with your body? It's only been a few days, how did you get so sick?" Just as he said that, Bao Lai's gaze met the eyes of the figure who had turned around. When he saw who it was, he froze on the spot, as if he had seen a ghost. He didn't know what to do. Not only was King Baoli stunned, but the 2 guards he brought with him were also rooted to the spot with a look of shock on their faces. This was because they recognized who it was. Who else could it be other than the Prime Minister, Apal? "Prime, Your Majesty the King, it's been 4 years. Have you been well?" Apal was naturally much calmer. It was obvious that he had expected this scene. At the same time, 4 bodyguards rushed out from the corner of the room. While the 2 palace guards were still in a daze, they instantly pinned them to the ground. The commotion behind him caught the attention of King Baoli. He turned around and saw his guard being restrained. His face turned pale with fright. He turned around and looked at Apuli. Then, as if he had realized something, he asked, "Minister, what are you trying to do?" "Your Majesty the King, there's no need to panic. We have no intention of harming you. In fact, we're here to help you," Apal said calmly. He pointed at a chair beside him as if to say, "Let's sit down and talk." Seeing Apu's calm expression, King Boraid sighed and sat down. Since he was here, he should take things as they came. He understood his prime minister too well. Since he had appeared, he must have made preparations. If he did not cooperate and insisted on shouting, it would only force the other party to do something unfavorable to him. King Boraid sat down on his chair. From Apu's eyes, he knew that he was halfway done. Just like how the other party understood him, he also understood the king very well. This was an ambitious king who could judge the situation and size up the situation. He was not an impulsive person. He knew what could be done, what could not be done, and even what should be done at the right time. Please allow me to address you as Your Majesty. Your Majesty, the current situation is like this. As Apu continued to explain, the situation of the entire Khanate alliance became clearer to King Baolid. Akmo City, the capital of the Kazakh Empire. More and more Mongolian cavalry appeared 30 li away from the city. They were like the dark clouds in the sky before a heavy downpour, appearing in groups on this land. The scouts gathered all the information they saw and presented it to Commander Tianhu. One by one, small black flags were inserted into the military sand table that had been prepared long ago. Sir, the enemy is coming at us aggressively. Why don't we take the initiative to attack? 1st Division Commander Temu stood in front of the sand table and suggested. 5th Division Commander, what do you think? Tianhu didn't reply. Instead, he looked at Division Commander Gong Feng, who was deep in thought. Sir, I think we should hold our ground. If we leave the city now, it will be much safer. However, it will also mean that we have opened up a path to the Ili region. Once the Mongolian army is free, they will be able to attack the 2nd and 3rd divisions. If that happens, they will be in a precarious situation. Gong Feng shook his head. His opinion was different from Division Commander Temu's. Chapter 1513. This time, without waiting for Tianhu to ask, Temu asked anxiously, defend? How? We only have about 20,000 men, but the enemy has 80,000. This doesn't even include the allied armies from other khaganates. Besides, our world's #1 cavalry army focuses on offense. Defense isn't our forte. Temu's words made sense. The world's #1 cavalry army was second only to the Black Cavalry in terms of cold weapons. No matter what kind of powerful enemy they faced, once they became their target, they would not have a good ending. This was a publicly acknowledged fact. However, when it came to defense, they were a little lacking. After all, cavalry focused on offense while infantry focused on defense. This had become a law in many people's hearts and an objective fact. No. Commander Temu is wrong. We don't only have about 20,000 men. We also have 6,000 captives and 100,000 Kazakh civilians. They can all be used by us. When Gong Feng said this, there was a smile on his face. It was obvious that he already had a card up his sleeve. Looking at Gong Feng's confident expression, Commander Tianhu chuckled. Oh, it seems like our 5th commander has a card up his sleeve. Since that's the case, the task of defending the city will be handed over to your 5th commander. If there's anything you need, we will do our best to cooperate. With Tianhu's words, Gong Feng felt more confident. Thank you for your support, Commander. Since that's the case, this subordinate will try his best. Gong Feng's so-called try was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. He had already prepared for it. He had carefully studied some of the beautiful battles under Yang Qindong's command and learned many things. One of them was how to use money to buy people's hearts for his own use. Harsenhan had left in a hurry. He had never thought that the 5-star army would suddenly appear in front of his capital. Without any preparation, he had left, but the wealth he had accumulated over the years was left in Akmo City. Now, this wealth was in the hands of the 5-star army. With these riches as capital, Gong Feng piled them up in the largest open space in the city. As more and more Mongolian citizens were attracted by these things, various rewards were placed in front of them, where they could earn riches if they contributed to the war. Using Gong Feng's explanation, it was natural for soldiers to be paid. As long as the commoners were willing to help the 5-star army defend the city, then the wealth would belong to them. In order to make everyone believe in his sincerity, everyone who came to watch the fun was rewarded. Some were given silver, some were given copper coins, and some were given refined salt, ironware, and precious furs, tea leaves, and silk. Just by coming to watch the show, they were able to obtain so many benefits. When the local things fell into their hands, more and more citizens began to believe in the 5-star army. As the saying goes, facts speak louder than words. With the things in hand, this was the real thing. It was far more effective than 10 or 100 sentences. With the cooperation of the surrendered Mongolian soldiers that Gong Feng had bribed beforehand, the first batch of people stepped forward and expressed their willingness to work for the 5-star army. When they expressed their desire to distribute the wealth to themselves, Gong Feng waved his hand and took out some good things in front of everyone. Things became much easier after that. Soon, there was a second batch of people, a third batch, and a fourth batch. 10 miles outside Akmo City, General Harbala, who had come under the orders of the Timur Empire's great general Mandaratu, stopped and began to set up camp with his 80,000 men. This time, he had come under the orders of the great general to deal with the 5-star army's cavalry. Harbala still had some chance of winning. He had already received accurate information that there were only 20,000 enemies guarding Akamo City. Moreover, Akamo City could not be considered a city at all. It was just a large market surrounded by earthen walls. Without the support of the city walls, Halbera was confident that the Pentastar Legion would not be his match. He was even prepared for the possibility that the enemy would flee the moment they caught wind of the news. If that happened, he wouldn't attack. Instead, he would continue east and cut off the 20,000 5-star army's advance. He would eliminate all potential threats. With his own thoughts and plans, Harbara took the initiative to stop when he was 10 miles away from Akamo. He wanted to create momentum and achieve his goal of defeating the enemy without fighting. However, the development of the situation didn't seem to go according to his plan. Facing the arrival of his army, the 5-star army didn't seem to have any intention of retreating. Instead, scouts reported that the enemy was reinforcing the city walls. There were even trenches outside the city that stretched for 5 miles. How dare they? Harbala was furious when he heard the news. Sheep should flee when they see a wolf. This was a law that had never changed. But now, someone wanted to violate this law. How could he tolerate it? Send people to fill in the trenches. We must pave a smooth path for the army to advance. At the same time, urge the other reinforcements to move faster. This time, this general will eat up these arrogant 5-star army. I want them to know the consequences of provoking us. I want them to kneel at my feet and beg for mercy, ha ha ha. Harbala was determined to eat up the 5-star army in front of him. In the city, Division Commander Gong Feng wasn't idle either. He was still organizing people to dig the trenches. Under the direct stimulation of wealth, the hundreds of thousands of people in the city who had the strength to do so were mobilized. If the Khanate army had hot air balloons, they would have seen the bustling scene in the city. 10 days passed in the blink of an eye. Under Harbala's constant urging, not only were the trenches 5 miles outside the city filled up, the first reinforcements of the Khanate army, the 20,000 cavalry of the Khanate of Kazan, also arrived outside Akmo under the leadership of General Hafertel. With 100,000 soldiers and no more obstacles in front of him, Harbala was very pleased with himself. He ordered a good night's rest. The next morning, they would attack the city. In one night, for his own safety and to prevent the 5-star army from breaking out, Harbala arranged for 30,000 cavalry to set up an ambush and set up a trap. However, it was a pity that the 5-star army did not make the slightest movement until daybreak. Ha ha ha, General, the 5-star army must be afraid. Hafertel looked up to the sky and laughed. At the same time, he looked down on Harbala's cautiousness. In his opinion, a 2-legged sheep would always be a 2-legged sheep. When had you ever seen a sheep that could eat a wolf? Knowing that he was being laughed at, Harbala ignored Hafertel and ordered his 10,000 cavalry to charge. He wanted to take the first merit and prove that the cavalry of the Timur Empire was the strongest. The wall was only 10 feet tall, but under the impact of the huge logs, a huge crack quickly appeared. Then, a gap of 20 to 30 feet appeared, allowing the cavalry to charge through. War drums sounded, and the 10,000 Timur cavalry charged in high spirits. But when the cavalry entered the earth wall, they were surprised to find that not a single one of the 5-star army cavalry could be seen. Just as many of the cavalrymen were confused and didn't understand what was going on, cries of agony rang out one after another. Many of the cavalrymen who were eager to contribute fell into the deep pits while charging and were stabbed to death by the sharpened logs that had been set up in the pits. They were severely injured. It won't work here. Try from another direction. The captain leading the cavalry roared and ordered the cavalry to change the direction of attack. But without exception, the path forward was filled with deep trenches. In other words, after the trenches on the outside, there were also countless trenches in the city. No one knew how long these trenches were. Akmo's city was very poor. It didn't have any proper city defenses, and there weren't many houses that were pleasing to the eye. But it had one advantage, and that was that it was large enough and long enough. Perhaps this had something to do with the fact that the Khans liked to fight for territory. Whenever they arrived at a new place, they would always try to carve out as much territory as possible for them to use. As the capital of the Kazakh Empire, Akmo City was naturally not small. This allowed Commander Gong Feng to have enough space to trade for time. Hearing the cries of the injured soldiers and seeing the countless trenches, the captain leading the cavalry retreated from the city with a headache and reported what he saw to Harbala. There's such a thing. The result was completely different from what he had imagined. At this moment, Harbala felt as if his heart was being scratched. The feeling of knowing that the enemy was right in front of him, but he couldn't see or hit them made him feel very uncomfortable. Continue to fill the trenches. This general doesn't believe that the 20,000 five-star army can be stronger than our 100,000 soldiers. Harbala had no choice but to use the stupidest method, which was to continue to fill the trenches. He didn't think that the five-star army could make the 100,000 Kazakh civilians in the city work for them. In his mind, his own people were the most unyielding and wouldn't be used by the Hans. Just like that, the 100,000 cavalry dismounted and put down their sabers, becoming engineers and starting to fill the trenches. Meanwhile, the 100,000 Kazakh civilians in the city continued to dig the trenches. One dug and one filled, as if they were in some kind of competition. The original cavalry charge had become a competition, completely going against the original intention of the war. It also bought a lot of time for the 20,000 cavalry of the world's first cavalry army. Chapter 15-14. The digging competition was still going on, and when Harbala put all the cavalry into it, the progress was noticeably faster. On the 13th day, they could finally see the figures digging in the distance. This gave the cavalry of the Khanate a glimmer of hope, and they became even more motivated to work. But at the same time, what made them depressed was that when the distance between the two sides could be seen clearly with their eyes, they discovered that the ones digging the tunnel were not the five-star army, but seemed to be some Kazakh civilians wearing clothes similar to theirs. This discovery made Harbala very angry. How could his own people be controlled by the Han people? This is a kind of blasphemy. Seeing Harbala so angry, the general of the Khanate came up with an idea, a stupid move. General, why don't we shout to the people on the other side? Presumably they were forced by the five-star army. As long as we promise to surrender to them, we can forgive their crimes. On the contrary, if they continue to help the Han people, we will kill them without mercy. I think they will make the right choice, and in this way, they will not be used by the enemy. Oh, good idea, good idea, good idea. Ha, come, go and shout according to General Harbala's idea. Remember, when you threaten them, use a more ruthless tone. These people are afraid of death. They will definitely not be used by the five-star army, ha ha ha. Whether it was in Harbala's eyes or in Harbala's eyes, the people were the most afraid of threats. As long as enough pressure was applied, they will definitely yield. And without the obstruction of the trenches, the more than 20,000 five-star army in front of them were like a group of sheep waiting to be slaughtered, and they could do whatever they wanted to them. It must be said that the two generals may be good at leading troops, but when it comes to understanding people's hearts, they are too far behind. At least compared to Gong Feng, they are not at the same level. On one side were 100,000 old and weak people, and on the other side were 100,000 strong cavalry in the prime of their lives. Their ability to work naturally could not be mentioned in the same breath. This is the reason why even though the Khanate's army moved later, their progress was still able to catch up. If this continues, it will only be a matter of time before the two sides fight. But Harbala's wrong move was destined to help the five-star army. After the local shouts came from afar, the originally tired Kazakh people were suddenly filled with energy, and their digging speed was even faster than before. Before, there was no threat, everyone was just helping out for the sake of money. But now, after the threatening words of the Khaganate Alliance army reached their ears, the people realized that they had no other choice. Or rather, their fates were completely tied together with the five-star army. Surrendering in the past. Not to mention whether the five-star army would agree or not, with the greedy character of the Khanate's army, if they surrendered, the Khanate's army would take all the good things. How many people would be willing to vent their anger on something that was already in their hands? And if the five-star army, then the army of the five-star army. This was the Kazakh people's people. They were bound together for good or ill. If it was said that before, they worked hard to dig holes to earn more money so that they could have a better life, then now, they were digging holes for their own safety. At this time, even if Gong Feng didn't give them any benefits, these people would still do their best. Gong Feng also saw this, but he didn't stop giving them benefits. Using the words of his teacher Yang Qindong, any problem that could be solved with money was not a problem. Not only did their shouts fail, but the other side's speed also began to increase. In contrast, the 100,000 cavalry that had been working for dozens of days and nights began to show signs of fatigue. They were cavalry, not laborers. Their battlefield was to kill enemies, not to dig holes. After a long time, some of the soldiers began to complain. The army's morale was shaken, and Harbala's face didn't look good for a day. However, just when he had nowhere to vent his anger, another piece of news came from the front that made him even more angry. One of the Khanate's army, the Ili Brigade, actually surrendered to the five-star army. The Ili Brigade was the first to become enemies with the five-star army. At that time, the Khanate's army and the five-star army weren't enemies. At least, they didn't interfere with each other's business. It was because of the Ili Brigade's request for help that the entire Khanate's army was pulled in. Okay. Right now, all the large and small Khanates were fighting with all their might against the five-star army. While they were fighting for the right to rule this area, the instigator, Ilahani, had actually chosen to surrender first, abandoning everyone. How could this not make people angry when they heard this? Especially the Khanates that were prepared to divide the Ili Brigade. Not only did they not get to eat the meat in their hands, they also attracted the wolf. It was really like trying to steal a chicken only to end up losing the rice used to lure it. It made people want to cry, but no tears came out. Of course, as a general in charge of the army, Harbala didn't have to think too much about it. He was thinking about how to deal with the more than 20,000 five-star army. Because the news said that after the Ili Brigade's army suddenly surrendered, the five-star army's main force on the eastern front didn't have any obstacles on their way. At this time, they were speeding toward the Kazakh Khanate. Although the news didn't say how many people the five-star army sent, the word main force was enough to make people vigilant. In other words, once the main force arrived, Harbala was afraid that he wouldn't be able to win. And if he couldn't deal with the five-star army before the main force arrived, he was afraid that he wouldn't have a chance to make a move. The situation became serious. If Harbala wasn't in a hurry before, he could still waste time with the other side, but now, time had become very important for him. He had no choice but to call the commander of the Kazan Khanate, General Hayfertel, to discuss how to speed up the battle with the main force of the five-star army as soon as possible. Hayfertel, who also received the news, also felt the seriousness of the situation. He didn't dare to watch from the sidelines. All 20,000 cavalry under his command threw themselves into the work of filling the hole, striving to fight with the five-star army in the shortest time possible. Tian Hu, who was surrounded, learned about the surrender of the Ili Brigade through a telegram. When Tian Hu heard the news, he called Temu, and Gong Feng, two division commanders, to share the joy with them. Amazing, teacher is amazing. He actually instigated the rebellion of the Ili Brigade. In this way, the initiative is in our hands. Division Commander Gong Feng, who rushed back from the front line, after hearing the news, sighed and admired. Of course, teacher is naturally the most amazing. Since the situation has changed like this, and we are not far away from the arrival of reinforcements, let's discuss how to counterattack. To be honest, the soldiers have all fattened up after staying in the city for more than a month. It's time for them to exercise their limbs. Tian Hu chuckled and looked at division commanders Temu, and Gong Feng. I agree. General, leave the vanguard mission to our division. You also know that we haven't done anything during this period of time, waiting for the time to counterattack. Temu, opened his mouth and asked for battle. Tian Hu didn't immediately agree after hearing this. Instead, he looked at Gong Feng, wanting to see what he had to say. Facing this kind of questioning gaze, Gong Feng nodded and said, I think it's time to counterattack. To be honest, for more than a month, we have taken large strides and given up a large area. Now that we have nowhere to retreat to, it's only a matter of time before we counterattack. No matter what, Division Commander Gong has worked hard. Good, since that's what you mean, then let's discuss how to counterattack. Come, tell me, when do you think it's appropriate to launch a counterattack? Tian Hu laughed. He had also had enough of this situation where they were constantly retreating. If it wasn't for the fact that he had been ordered to stay here like a nail, he wouldn't have taken the 100,000 enemy cavalry seriously. Throughout the history of the world's #1 cavalry army, there were countless examples of them winning battles with fewer troops. He had long been accustomed to boasting. The 5-star army was preparing for a counterattack. Halba was completely unaware of this. He was still constantly urging the soldiers to speed up the filling of the holes. For this reason, the soldiers had even changed from 4 shifts a day to 2 shifts, increasing the manpower. As a result, they were able to speed up the filling of the holes. However, the soldiers didn't get enough rest and were generally not in good spirits. At this moment, Halba didn't care so much. Perhaps in his opinion, even if the soldiers didn't have enough energy, but with 100,000 against 20,000, he was still confident of victory. Another night had arrived. It started to drizzle, making the filling of the holes more difficult. Even so, Halba didn't intend to let the soldiers rest. Seeing that he was less than 4 kilometers away from the 5-star army, he could already see them from afar. He didn't want to delay their progress because of the rain. Out of the 100,000 cavalrymen, there were 50,000 of them working in 2 shifts to fill up the holes. Under the heavy rain, their feet were walking on the muddy ground, and they were very tired. After a night, the sky started to clear up. Halba came to the front line and saw that the distance between the 2 sides had decreased from 4 miles to 2 miles. His eyes were filled with satisfaction. Very good, continue. In 3 days, we can launch the attack. Looking at the Kazakh civilians 2 li away, Harbala swore in his heart that when he defeated the 5-star army, he would not leave a single one of them alive. He would kill them all. He wanted to use this opportunity to tell everyone what the consequences of going against the Khanate army were. Chapter 15:15. While Harbala was still dreaming, the soldiers of the Khaganate army who had been busy the whole day changed shifts. The exhausted Mongolian cavalry returned to their tents to rest. Another 50,000 men entered the battlefield to fill in the holes and pave the way. Tired from the day's work, the soldiers only ate a little when they entered the tent and went to sleep. To them, the temptation of food was not as attractive as the bed. What they did not know was that for many, this sleep meant that they would never be able to open their eyes again. At night, there was a gentle breeze that felt very cool on the body. A division of 10,000 cavalry mounted their horses in the cool breeze. They checked their equipment and prepared to attack at any time. Tonight was the night that Tian Hu and the other 2 had discussed the counterattack. No one knew that the Kazakh civilians who looked like they were working hard to dig the deep holes during the day were actually just kicking up dust. The reason for doing this was to confuse the Khanate coalition army. In fact, The land wasn't destroyed, so the cavalry could move unimpeded at any time. How is it? Has the enemy not filled in the holes yet? Commander Taimur rode on his horse. There was excitement and anxiety on his face. At the same time, there was a look of disdain for the enemy. It should be soon. However, once the enemy discovers that the path is cleared, they will react quickly without the deep holes. That is why Commander Taimur must hurry. At this time, Tian, who was also riding on a warhorse. Behind him were thousands of soldiers directly under his command. They would be the second wave of attack to attack the enemy. Rest assured, Commander. This subordinate understands. Taimur nodded. His eyes were bright as he looked forward. He was only waiting for Commander Gong Feng's signal to attack. At this moment, Gong Feng was holding a telescope and lying behind a mound of dirt. He was only about 60 steps away from the nearest enemy. At this moment, if he was discovered, the enemy would only need a wave of arrows to take his life. But even so, it still did not stop Gong Feng from risking his life to take the risk. He needed to have first-hand information. Once he discovered that the enemy had filled in all the deep holes, he needed to immediately send the signal to attack. This rhythm had to be grasped well. If they were late, the enemy would be on guard. If they wanted to sneak into the enemy's camp and cause serious damage, it would be impossible. Holding the night vision binoculars, Gong Feng carefully observed the other party's movements. Gong Feng didn't know how long he had been staring at them until there was some commotion in the other side's camp. He also saw some people turn around and run back. From the looks of it, it was obvious that they were going to report the news. Gong Feng knew that the road must have been cleared. Send the signal, ask the first division to attack immediately, quick. Gong Feng hurriedly shouted to the radio operator beside him. The messenger who received the order quickly lit the torch in his hand and waved it around. 3 miles behind, Commander Tian, who was overjoyed when he saw the flashing flames. The path is clear, we can attack now. Understood. Taimur replied excitedly. Then, with a loud shout, the 10,000 five-star army soldiers pulled out their sabers. Shouting loudly, they urged their warhorses to charge forward. Throw away the torches, retreat quickly. The torches here had also attracted the attention of the Khaganate Alliance army dozens of steps away. Gong Feng grabbed the radio operator's arm and ordered him to throw away the torch. Then, he pulled him and ran quickly to the rear. Not long after Gong Feng ran away, a series of arrows landed near the place where he was originally at, near the torch that had not been completely extinguished. The ground was covered in arrows. But then, these arrows were trampled to the ground by the charging warhorses of a division. After Taimur's cavalry charged forward for 3 miles, they finally arrived in front of the panicking Khaganate Alliance army and began a bloody massacre. Caught off guard, the tens of thousands of Khaganate Alliance army soldiers became lambs waiting to be slaughtered. Facing an uncountable number of cavalrymen of the 5-star army, what they had in their hands were only iron tools used to fill the ground. These could not even be considered as decent weapons. Furthermore, they were infantry. How could they possibly fight against the well-prepared 5-star army? Run! No one knew who shouted first, but it became an order for the soldiers to retreat. In the dark night, countless black dots began to rapidly retreat. In order to run faster, many people threw the iron tools in their hands to the ground to reduce the burden on their bodies. Charge straight through, don't worry about these people. Commander Taimur rode on his horse. When he saw many soldiers stop and swing their sabers at the unarmed and panicked Khaganate Alliance army soldiers, he couldn't help but shout loudly. Since they were the vanguard, they naturally had to break through the enemy's camp and kill their courage. It wasn't their responsibility to kill the defeated army. The commander gave the order. The highly disciplined soldiers of the world's first cavalry army quickly adjusted their direction. In groups of a few dozen, they formed an arrow formation and pierced into the Khaganate Alliance army's camp like sharp blades. In the chaos of the night, the Khaganate Alliance army soldiers could not tell how many Khaganate Alliance army soldiers had arrived. Fear engulfed the 50,000 soldiers as they frantically retreated. During this time, countless people trampled on each other. Whenever someone fell to the ground in the process of escaping, even if they were not trampled to death by their comrades, they would be trampled to death by the horses of the world's first cavalry army. The battle had been one-sided from the start. 10,000 cavalry chased after 50,000 infantry and continuously slashed at each other. It was like a monstrous flood that poured into the Khaganate Alliance army's camp. Harbala was woken up from his sleep. When he learned that the 5-star army had launched an attack, his face was filled with disbelief. This is impossible. Didn't they not open up the path? There are so many deep pits. How did their cavalry charge through? General, we have been deceived. The 5-star army did not dig the pits at all. They were just putting on an act. When we filled up all the pits at night, they launched their counterattack. We are completely unprepared and the army has suffered heavy losses. The captain who came to report was covered in sweat as he spoke anxiously. What? Cunning 5-star army. Cunning Han. Harbala couldn't help but roar when he heard this. After shouting a few times to vent his dissatisfaction, Harbala shouted again. What are you still standing here for? Quickly gather the troops and prepare to counterattack. As the cavalry of the Timur Empire, although the situation was sudden, when the general gave the order, many soldiers still ran out of their tents. They picked up their bows and prepared to defend. Just as these Khaganate Alliance army soldiers rushed out and before they could complete their formation, countless black figures appeared in front of them. The ones at the front were the 50,000 Khaganate Alliance army soldiers. It's our own people. A sharp-eyed soldier saw the identity of the incoming people and shouted. Release the arrows. Harbala, who had already put on his armor, came to the front of the camp. When he saw the black figures entering the range of the arrows, he didn't hesitate to shout. However, the order was given, but not many people carried it out. It was obvious that they couldn't bear to point their arrows at their own comrades. What are you waiting for? Don't you know that these are already defeated soldiers? If we ignore them and let them come, we won't have any defense left. Release the arrows immediately. Harbala shouted with all his might. He didn't forget to add, those who don't release the arrows will be disobeying orders. Execute. When the word execute fell, the hesitant Khaganate Alliance army soldiers no longer dared to hesitate and released the arrows they had prepared beforehand. The arrows landed on the black figures rushing towards them. For a moment, screams of pain sounded one after another. General Hayfertel was among the defeated soldiers. His luck wasn't too good. He was the one leading the troops to fill up the trenches tonight. But as a general, he didn't need to do anything. Under the protection of some soldiers, he set up a tent and went to rest when the sky turned dark. He didn't sleep for long before a sudden tremor woke him up. At the same time, he knew that something bad was going to happen. He immediately retreated with the defeated soldiers. All he wanted to do was to regroup with the main force and then block the charge of the 5-star army cavalry. As long as they were able to stop the enemy's momentum, they would be able to counterattack and turn defeat into victory under the condition that the path was cleared. After running all the way, Hayfertel was a bit out of breath. Finally, the main camp was right in front of him. Just when he was about to win, the enemy suddenly released a row of arrows. The soldiers in front of him were shot down by their own arrows. This scene made him want to curse out loud. He wanted to curse his comrades for not having eyes. But at this time, he heard Harbala's shout. He finally understood that this general wanted to kill them in order to protect himself. Behind him was the 5-star army's cavalry that was closing in on him, and in front of him were his own allies who were ready with their bows and arrows. At this moment, Hayfertel was caught in a dilemma. If he wanted to fight against the 5-star army behind him, he didn't have any weapons in his hands. In addition, he was in a disadvantageous position against the cavalry. The consequences were obvious. Since that was the case, he might as well continue to charge forward. As long as he could reach his own camp, pick up his weapon and mount his horse, he would have the strength to fight again. Brothers, we are allies. We are on the same side. Please let us pass. We will fight side by side with you. After thinking it through, Hefertel took the lead and shouted loudly. After his voice reached the camp, the other soldiers also followed suit and shouted. Chapter 15:16. The arrows couldn't stop the infantrymen. On the contrary, the cries for mercy were transmitted into the army. This infuriated Herba greatly. What do you mean by letting you come over and fighting side by side? I'm afraid that once you come over, our formation will become even more chaotic. The 5-star army will take the opportunity to charge in. If that happens, there's no need to talk about resistance. We'll all die here. Thinking of the serious consequences, Herba's face turned fierce. Don't let them come over. Let them go back and face the 5-star army. Tell them that we will remember their bravery. Herba's shout was heard by more and more soldiers. When it reached the ears of Herba's group, they almost died from anger. Facing the 5-star army, this bravery will be remembered. But what use is that? Without weapons or horses, how can they be a match for the elite Han cavalry? This is clearly an act of suicide. As for being remembered for their bravery, what use is that? Not many of them will be able to leave this place alive. Who will repay this favor? This is simply forcing us to die. The anger in Herba's heart was completely ignited by these words. If we're going to die anyway, why not drag Herba down with us? That way, we won't be lonely on the road to the Yellow Springs. With that thought in mind, Hefertel shouted again, Brothers, if we don't move, we'll die. Since our comrades despise us, let's fight it out with them and let them know how serious the consequences of abandoning their comrades are. Fight it out, let's drag them down with us. The abandoned soldiers shouted with tears on their faces. It was a matter of course for the enemy to kill them. But for their allies to do this to them was too heartbreaking. Since the enemy didn't care about their comrades, why should they care? Thus, Hafiter led his men and charged forward with a furious look on his face. Behind them, Division Commander Temu saw the changes on the battlefield very clearly. He had no intention of interfering. This was a scene he was happy to see. As long as the Khanate soldiers didn't turn around and attack him, he wouldn't force them too much. The actions of the 5-star army behind them gave great encouragement to Hafit, Big Mo, and the others. It was as if they had found someone to rely on. Their attacks became even more ferocious, to the extent that the vanguard of both sides soon clashed together. At such a close distance, the effect of arrows was very limited. Finally, Herba and the others who didn't have to passively take a beating began to counterattack. Some of them even stole the enemy's weapons, causing great losses and threats to Herba's army. Shoot, no need to be polite, kill them all. Harbara's eyes flashed with anger. Seeing that the 10,000 men at the front were about to be breached, he hurriedly ordered the other Khanate soldiers to fire arrows from afar. At this moment, he didn't care about who was on his side or who was his opponent. In his eyes, anyone who stood opposite him was his enemy. It's time to charge. All soldiers of the 1st Division, listen up. Charge. Let's show them the power of our 1st Army. Taimur watched as the arrows rained down. Hundreds and thousands of Khanate soldiers died in front of him. The pace of the attack was slowed, so he didn't wait any longer. After giving the order, a total of 5 regiments, 10,000 cavalrymen, rode on their horses and launched a fierce charge. Cavalrymen's charge was different from that of infantry. They were faster, stronger, and more ferocious. After the 10,000 cavalrymen launched a series of attacks, the entire earth began to tremble violently. This powerful movement caused the anti-Khanate soldiers to involuntarily retreat to the sides, especially after a division of soldiers shouted that those who surrender and kneel on the ground could live. One after another, the anti-Khanate soldiers obediently knelt on the ground. This action not only caused Hafertel's soldiers to kneel, but also many of Harbala's soldiers who were standing at the front to kneel down. This seemed to have become a chain reaction, providing an even more advantageous condition for the cavalry to charge. The horses galloped past. As expected, the kneeling Khanate soldiers weren't harmed in the slightest. On the other hand, those who were still standing, those who genuinely wanted to resist, or those who hadn't yet reacted, were killed by the cavalry. As the cavalry charged forward, one figure after another was slashed to death in the darkness. Lines of defense began to crumble one after another. The soldiers could not stop their footsteps from retreating. Anyone who didn't want to die wouldn't use their bodies to block the charge of the horses. Quick, quick, where are our cavalrymen? Haven't they mounted yet? Halbera roared anxiously when he saw several lines of defense being breached in front of him. Perhaps it was because of his shouts that the first batch of Khanate Alliance soldiers on horses finally arrived behind him. Some of them were still dressed in disheveled clothes, and there was a hint of panic on their faces. But no matter what, they still mounted their horses and held their cavalry swords in their hands. Ha, good, order them to charge. We must stop the 5-star army's attack. Halba was no longer nervous and even a little fearful. Instead, he became much more high-spirited and vigorous. The enemy cavalry is here. Take out your crossbows and shoot the enemy at close range. Commander Taimur also saw the black shadows and the sound of horse hooves in the distance. There wasn't the slightest hint of nervousness on his face as he gave the order. Oftentimes, this kind of cavalry charge was the most brutal. Often, who knew how many corpses would be left behind in a single charge? But all of this was nothing to the soldiers of the world's #1 cavalry army. Some of them were veterans who had experienced dozens of battles, big and small, and were used to seeing life and death. Even some of the rookies had experienced dozens or even dozens of battles. They were no longer rookies who panicked at the sound of horse hooves. On the contrary, these people's shouts and horse hooves could stimulate their adrenaline even more effectively, causing their blood to surge and allowing them to display their true strength. The 5 regimental commanders received the order, followed by the battalion commanders, company commanders, platoon commanders, squad leaders, and even every soldier received the order. Correspondingly, more and more small crossbows were taken off their backs and held in their hands. Then, the counterattack began. At a distance of less than 40 or 50 steps, the crossbow bolts rushed forward like rain, landing in the camp of the Khanate Alliance's cavalry, causing waves of horses to fall off. In a direct confrontation, apart from the better-equipped black cavalry, even Ling Feng was no match for the world's #1 cavalry army. Not to mention the Khanate Alliance's cavalry, who were in a hurry and didn't make much preparations, and were physically and mentally exhausted. In just a single clash, the first group of cavalry was scattered. Soon, less than 500 of them were left. Then, they turned around and fled, running towards the back. Hold on for me. Seeing that the result of the battle wasn't as evenly matched as he had imagined, and that it was a one-sided defeat, Halba shouted with a dejected face. But in this chaotic moment, such a shout wouldn't attract anyone's attention at all. It was completely drowned out by the galloping of the horses. Seeing that the second wave of cavalry was quickly defeated by the 5-star army, Halba knew that he no longer had the ability to control the 5-star army's cavalry. He had failed. Unwilling to accept this, Halba gathered up the remaining soldiers and frantically retreated under the cover of the moonlight, leaving behind the brave cavalry of the 5-star army on the battlefield. The changes on the battlefield were so fast that it was beyond everyone's expectations. When Tianhu and Gong Feng arrived with the cavalry, the battle was basically over. Apart from the corpses on the battlefield, there were also captives kneeling on the ground. What's going on? Tianhu looked at all this with a frown, somewhat confused. Commander Taimur rode up to Tianhu. Commander, these soldiers of the Khaganate Alliance are too weak. We only charged and they were defeated. Except for a few who escaped, most of them are kneeling on the ground, waiting for us to take them captives. Taimur chuckled excitedly. This was the battle record of their division, and it wasn't something that others could take away. Thinking that his division alone had defeated 100,000 enemies, this was something that he could brag about. I see, could this be? Tianhu didn't dare to believe it completely. Out of caution, he looked at Gong Feng. Commander, this shouldn't be the enemy's plan. It must be that our division is too brave. It's just that the combat power of the Khaganate Alliance is too low, ha. Gong Feng said with a smile. In this battle, his contribution was not small. If it were not for the success of his plan, the enemy would not have been implicated and the battle would not have been dragged out until now. Now that they had finally defeated 100,000 Khaganate Alliance soldiers, he felt that the burden on his shoulders could finally be lifted. Gong Feng had the same opinion. Tian Hu nodded in agreement. It's not that the enemy is too weak, but that we are too strong. We waited for them to tire themselves out and attacked suddenly. How could these Khaganate Alliance soldiers be a match for our first Sky Cavalry army? Ha, alright, immediately send the news of victory to the 6th young master and wait for the next order to take these captives into custody. Oh right, they fled in a hurry, so they probably didn't have time to take the provisions with them. Take them all so we can have a good meal, ha. Chapter 15-17. They had been surrounded for a long time. Although Harsanhan had left many things behind when he escaped, there were still hundreds of thousands of civilians with them. Just a day's worth of food and drinks was not a small amount. Seeing their stock dwindle, Tian Hu did not say anything, but he was anxious. Now that they had won, they had to gather some good things to strengthen their foundation. The army commander gave the order, and the soldiers below began to get busy. All the soldiers of the 5-star army had excited looks on their faces. They had defeated 100,000 enemy cavalry with only 20,000 men, and they had suffered less than 1,000 casualties. This was definitely a victory that they could brag about to anyone. In contrast, Harbala, who had escaped, looked like he was about to cry. 100,000 men had surrounded 20,000 Han soldiers for more than a month, and they had still been defeated in the end. Now that there were only about 10,000 people who had escaped with him, he could even imagine that once General Mandolatu learned of this news, he would most likely be executed according to military law. But he had no choice but to return. If he went back, he would just die. If he did not return, he would implicate his family and die with him. Halbera led his defeated army back to the Timur Empire, his face ashen and deathly pale. The news of their defeat quickly spread across the land. First, there was the rebellion of Ili, who had surrendered to the 5-star army. Next, there was the defeat of the Timur Empire's 100,000 soldiers. This was like adding hail to snow. When the khans and generals of the various khans heard this, it was a heavy blow to their hearts. Many people could not help but wonder if they could still obtain the final victory in this battle. If they did not win, once they were defeated by the 5-star army, what would be waiting for them? Would their entire tribe be wiped out? Since that was the case, why not follow Ili's example and surrender now? At least they could still keep their lives. Right. Someone once said that the 5-star army would not only spare the lives of those who surrendered, but would also leave them with 10% of their wealth. Who knew if this was true? Akmo's city defense battle was not only a defeat, but it also affected the morale of the army, the people, and the will to fight. Once an army lost its morale, it would be difficult for them to win a battle no matter how many soldiers they had. When this news reached the ears of Supreme General Mandolatu, he knew what he had to do. Previously, it was to delay the enemy and deplete the enemy's rations so that they could subdue the enemy without fighting. But now, with the 5-star army's main force on the eastern front opening up a path, this method was obviously ineffective. Since the situation on the battlefield had changed, Mandaratu had to change his tactics accordingly. His choice was to find a division of the 5-star army and engage them in a decisive battle. He wanted to win a few battles first. At the very least, he had to give the other Khaganates some confidence and prove that the 5-star army was not invincible. When Harbala returned to Mandaratu's side with 10,000 defeated soldiers, he was not immediately executed. Instead, he was given a chance to redeem himself by leading these 10,000 defeated soldiers to act as the vanguard in the battle against the 5-star army. Not only that, but he was also given the authority to command tens of thousands of soldiers. This kind of conviction moved Harbala to tears. This was also one of Mandaratu's brilliance. He could be completely at ease using such a person. At the very least, he would do his best. To be able to survive and have a chance to perform meritorious deeds was already the best outcome. Harbala did not have any complaints about this. He gladly accepted it, and at the same time, he was prepared to either succeed or die trying. Soon, he received a military order and found out that his target was Mangishir's Wushugu. Speaking of Wushugu, he was once the general of the Golden Horde's Golden Horde cavalry. In terms of personal strength, there was no need to mention his strength. Although in the later stages, Yang Qindong redistributed nearly 20,000 Golden Horde cavalry because of necessity, or perhaps because he wanted to weaken Wushugu's strength, as a former general, he still received the lion's share. For example, among the 40,000 men in his Mangishir's Golden Horde cavalry, there were 8,000 of them. It was precisely because of these 8,000 Golden Horde cavalry that Wushugu was full of confidence. When he led the army out, he would go wherever there was danger. He did not put the so-called Khaganate in his eyes at all. After fighting all the way from Eastern Europe, Wushugu had a better understanding of the five-star army. He knew the importance of meritorious deeds. He also wanted to perform meritorious deeds for a better future. As such, when the other five-star army could not find the enemy's main force and were waiting and recuperating, he still led Mangishir's Golden Horde cavalry to roam around, searching for the main force of the Timur Empire's cavalry. This was also the main reason why Mendolatir had set him as his target. Compared to the other five-star army's Golden Horde cavalry, this Mangishir's Golden Horde cavalry was easier to track down. If he could wipe out this cavalry division, the 40,000 five-star army's Golden Horde cavalry would be enough to raise the morale of the entire army and let those who were wavering see hope again. For this plan, Mendolatir had spent a lot of effort. Out of the 180,000 men in his army, he had sent out 120,000 men. With a ratio of 3-to-1 and a familiarity with the terrain, he did not believe that he could not wipe out the five-star army. The Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry hidden in various places started to become active. However, Yang Qindong did not know about this. First, he was not familiar with the terrain. Although he had sent out many scouts and had a rough understanding of the terrain, there were still too many things that he did not know. It was these places that hid the Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry. Second, Yang Xie's development was too fast. The intelligence department was unable to keep up. It was just like when the Japanese coveted me in Greater China. They had spent 10 to 20 years to investigate and understand all kinds of information. They really wanted all kinds of information. Even so, in the later stages of the war, they were unable to obtain any important information. The development of the intelligence department was not something that could be achieved with money. They needed time and accumulation. Because of these objective factors, when Mangishir's Golden Horde cavalry once again tried to probe the enemy's main force and was surrounded, Yang Qindong still did not obtain any information. Of course, this was also partly because of Wushugu. It was because of his arrogance that he did not immediately report when he discovered a clue, causing him to be surrounded. At first, Wushugu acted as usual and sent out his troops to search for the enemy's main force. Because this was not the first time he had sent out his troops and had not achieved any results in the past, this time, he did not think that it was necessary. At the very least, it could be used to train his troops. Thus, Wushugu led out with 40,000 soldiers. When they accidentally discovered a group of 500 Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry, he did not immediately report it. Instead, he went with the idea of exterminating the Golden Horde cavalry and gaining some merit. Thinking about it, it made sense. Facing a cavalry of 40,000 men, 500 enemies was simply too few. It was so few that Wushugu did not think that it was a great merit. It was only when they chased the Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry for 100 li and discovered a second group of 2,000 Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry that Wushugu became more alert. If they could completely exterminate 2,500 Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry, it would not be considered a great merit, but it would still be a merit. Wushugu also did not intend to report it. While leading his army in pursuit, he made a wrong decision, and that was to split up his troops. In order to not let the Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry escape, Wushugu chose to split up his troops and encircle the Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry. However, what he did not know was that when he split up his troops, his every move was discovered by the Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry. Behind this Golden Horde cavalry was another large group of Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry. In the end, when Wushugu seemed to have completed his encirclement, a large encirclement had also formed around him. At this time, his Meng 1st Regiment was also completely surrounded by the Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry. It was also at this time that Wushugu felt that something was wrong when the Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry began to appear on a large scale. At this time, because he had been chasing the Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry, he had already traveled 400 li. At this distance, even if he immediately sent a message to the 5-star army for reinforcements, it would take at least 2.5 days for reinforcements to arrive. However, facing the Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry that had been preparing for this for a long time and had 3 times the number of soldiers, how could Wushugu possibly have 2 days? He was leading Meng Yishur. To outsiders, he was leading the 5-star army. However, in reality, he was not a direct descendant of the 5-star army. There was not a single proper Han in the entire army. This kind of army would not be taken seriously. Most of the time, they would be treated as cannon fodder. Due to this understanding, Wushugu had never thought that Yang Qindong would come to his aid. Therefore, after he figured out that he was surrounded, he directly sent a telegram to Yang Qindong to make up his mind. This time, because of his arrogance, Meng Yishur's army was surrounded by a large number of soldiers. It was impossible for him to break out of the encirclement. Escaping was not his style. He had already decided to live and die with Meng Yishur. He would kill to the last man. He would not surrender. He hoped that Yang Qindong could take care of his family on account of his willingness to fight to the death. After sending out the telegram, Wushugu ordered the telegraphers to dismantle the telegram and properly hide it. He also attached a mark to it so that he could find it later. Then, he personally led the 8,000 Golden Horde cavalry and launched a fierce attack on the 2,500 Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry. The enemies outside were eyeing them covetously. If they wanted to deal with them with all their might, they could not be distracted by other things. The 2,500 Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry had to be eliminated. Chapter 15:18. If one were to say that this was the correct decision, then when Wushugu personally led his 8,000 elite golden armored cavalry into the encirclement of the Timur cavalry, it only took 4 hours for the 2,500 enemy cavalry to be completely wiped out. In the end, not even a single captive was taken, all of them dead. While Wushugu was dealing with the central problem, the 120,000 Timur cavalry also launched an attack from the outer perimeter. In order to ensure that they had enough time to eliminate the enemy in the center, Meng Yishur began a defensive battle. In just over 4 hours, more than 6,000 corpses and more than 3,000 injured people were left behind. In just 4 hours, they had lost nearly 10,000 golden armored cavalry. This made Wushugu's heart ache, and he could see the determination of the Timur cavalry. They must have made up their mind to eat up his Meng Yishur. Even though the other side had already made up their minds, Wushugu still led his soldiers in a desperate counterattack. With enemies on all sides, every minute and every second seemed to be extremely long. Finally, when the sky turned dark, Meng Yishur was finally able to take a breather by relying on the weather. However, at the same time, they had paid a heavy price. According to the statistics, another 8,000 golden armored cavalry had died. In less than a day, nearly half of their forces had been killed or injured. This made Wushugu realize that tomorrow would be the day of the final battle. He raised his head to look at the moonlight above his head. This might be the last time in his life that he would be able to enjoy the beautiful night. Meng Yishur spent the entire night in despair. The next morning, when the Timur cavalry surrounded them, they began to shout for them to surrender. In general, they said that they were all brothers of the Mongol branch and had a common ancestor. As long as they were willing to put down their weapons and surrender, they would spare their lives, but they would only be slaves. This kind of shouting was destined to be useless. Yang Qindong was a staunch nationalist. Since he dared to use these foreign races, he naturally had his own plans. For example, every foreign race soldier that joined the 5-star army had at least 3 families behind them as guarantors. On the battlefield, if these foreign race soldiers were to surrender or betray them, they would directly implicate those who had guaranteed that they wouldn't betray them. Just based on this point, none of the 20,000 Meng soldiers dared to surrender. Therefore, the persuasion only lasted for less than an hour before it ended in failure. As the general of the death squad, Harbala was furious when he saw that Meng Yi's men were still not surrendering even though they were about to die. Thus, he led his 10,000 men to act as the vanguard. These cavalrymen were all sinners. If they wanted to wash away their sins, they could only prove themselves through bloody battles. This allowed them to have a stronger will than ordinary soldiers, so once they charged, they would be very fierce. Even though Meng Yishur had sent out the same 10,000 cavalrymen, they still couldn't hold on any longer. In the end, it was only when Wushugu personally led 5,000 golden-armored cavalrymen into the enemy's ranks that they were able to push them back temporarily. In just one battle, Meng Yishurfu had lost another 3,000 men. Moreover, the enemy had only sent out 10,000 cavalrymen. If the enemy had sent out their entire army, Meng Yishur would have been wiped out in one battle. Even though the situation was so bad, Wushugu didn't show it on his face, other than grumbling in his heart. He constantly comforted the soldiers and told them that with the 5-star army's special treatment, even if they were to die on the battlefield, their families would still be able to receive a considerable amount of compensation. Compared to working for others, it was much more worth it. Next, it was time for them to show their loyalty. It was also time for them to seek the welfare of their living family members. The special treatment made all the soldiers fearless of death. Some of them had even made up their minds to die. In any case, they were going to die anyway. Now that they could die on the battlefield and work for their families, it was worth it. With such a mentality, Meng Yishur was able to display a powerful combat strength. With the golden-armored cavalrymen sandwiched between them, they were able to display their superiority as elite cavalrymen. This battle lasted from morning to afternoon, repelling 7 attacks from the Timur cavalry. In the end, Meng Yishur only had 8,000 men left. Of these 8,000 men, the golden-armored cavalrymen accounted for half of them. In just one day, 4,000 golden-armored cavalrymen had died. This made Wushugu's heart ache, but when he thought about how it wouldn't be long before he would also follow these people to the Yellow Springs, his expression became a lot calmer. After attacking for a day and a half, even with 3 times the number of troops, they still couldn't completely wipe out the 40,000 5-star army. This made Harbala very angry. This was his chance to perform. If his performance wasn't perfect, he couldn't guarantee that Great General Mandra wouldn't let him off. Therefore, he didn't have any intention to rest. He led the army to launch a new round of attacks, showing an attitude of not giving up until death. There was less than 3 hours before the sky turned completely dark. Harbala wanted to use these 3 hours to completely wipe out the 5-star army. He wouldn't allow any more accidents to happen. For this reason, he sent out almost all the cavalrymen who had never been on the battlefield. These people were full of energy and spirit. A total of 35,000 men against 8,000 tired men. No matter how you look at it, they had a lot of advantages. Brothers, the final moment has come. It is also time for us to show our loyalty to Bugnam of Gojoseon. Everyone, follow me, charge. Wushugu's body was covered in blood, most of it was the enemy's. He also had 2 wounds on his body, but they weren't fatal. Blood covered his face, making him look extremely ferocious as he spoke. Behind him were 4,000 golden-armored cavalrymen. Almost all of them were covered in blood, and some of them were already very weak from the continuous battles. Although they were on the defensive side, they were only on a small hill. If it wasn't for this small terrain advantage, they would have been swallowed up by the enemy long ago. However, for 40,000 cavalrymen, a small hill was not enough. They were able to hold on until now because of their strong will. They believed in the Five-Star Army's powerful intelligence network. The results of this battle would definitely be reported to the wise King Wunan of Damyang. If they could kill more enemies now, their families would be rewarded more after they died. For this matter, everyone put their lives on the line. Under the circumstances where they were outnumbered and the terrain was unfavorable to them, they paid the price of 30,000 men to heavily injure the enemy. This was already a very difficult matter. The 4,000 golden-armored cavalrymen stood on their horses, looking forward. They had already lost count of how many times they had charged, and they had long regarded death as nothing. Perhaps in their hearts, death was a form of relief. Behind the golden-armored cavalrymen were the 4,000 ordinary soldiers. Before this, some of them had never killed anyone before. However, in just over a day, they had experienced almost all the cruelty that could be experienced. Right now, they could proudly tell everyone that they were already veterans who had experienced the cruelest battles. If these people could survive and recuperate for a while, they would become the backbone of the army. However, they knew that living was already a luxury for them. They did not dare to have any hope. Upon hearing Wu Shugu's words, the 8,000-some cavalry raised their sabers and looked at the tens of thousands of enemy cavalry approaching. The panic in their eyes had long since disappeared, replaced by a will to die, an indifference, an attitude that did not matter to death. Wait. Just when the morale of the army was at its lowest, just when the 8,000 men were about to lose all hope, just when they wanted to shed their blood on the battlefield. Suddenly, Commander Wu Shugu's words pulled everyone back from the brink of death. Look, what is that? It seems to be our reinforcements. Yes, it's the reinforcements. Look, they are holding up the 5-star flag. Our reinforcements are here. Brothers, we are saved. More and more people saw the green flood coming from afar. Although they were too far away to see how many people there were, just by looking at the imposing manner and the many flags that were raised, they were afraid that there would be a lot of people coming. In less than 2 days, the 5-star army's reinforcements had actually appeared. This was indeed out of Wu Shugu's expectations. Of course, this was good news. This was the hope for him to bring his brothers out of the encirclement. This was the chance for his Mang Yishe to stand tall in the 5-star army. With the sudden appearance of the reinforcements, the 8,000 soldiers of the Meng 1st Regiment, who were prepared to die, finally saw a glimmer of hope. It was as though in an instant, everyone was brimming with energy, and they could charge into the enemy camp once more. However, when the same thing fell into Harba La's eyes, it made him extremely angry and fearful. This time, the matter of dealing with Mang Yishe was a top secret. The location chosen was also decided by General Mendo Latu 3 days ago. The news could not have been leaked. Then how did the 5-star army's reinforcements know about this matter? Could it be that they already knew about this matter and did not make a move for a long time because they were waiting for an opportunity? Now that they felt that the opportunity was ripe, they did not hide anymore and jumped out. Was it to completely destroy them? Or was it that the 5-star army's legendary communication device that could spread the news over a long distance had taken effect? Was it because they were surrounded that the news was spread? But if that was the case, the reinforcements should not have arrived so quickly. They had investigated beforehand and the nearest 5-star army's reinforcements were 400 li away. How could they arrive in such a short time? Chapter 15:19. All kinds of guesses and thoughts filled his mind. His expression changed again and again. He realized that he could no longer grasp the situation of the 5-star army. It was only when a chilly arch beside him reminded him that his soul returned to normal. General, the 5-star army's reinforcements are here. They seem to have a lot of flags and a lot of people. What should we do? What should we do? Should we kill them or not? If we kill them, the 5-star army's reinforcements might arrive before they could completely wipe out the Meng 1st Division. If that happened, would their main force be able to retreat safely? If they didn't fight and retreated now, it would be difficult to explain to General Mendu Tuesday Harbala was already a guilty general, and if he was punished for both crimes, it was easy to imagine what kind of punishment he would receive. But no matter what the outcome was, it was related to Harbala's life. It was best for him to make the decision. Harbala's expression was conflicted after being reminded by the lieutenant. If we fight, we might be wiped out. If we don't fight, we will definitely be beheaded. But the good thing is that we can guarantee the safety of the army. One was that he might die, the other was that everyone might die. It was a difficult choice. But seeing the 5-star army's reinforcements getting closer and closer, he didn't have much time to think. In the end, he gritted his teeth and said, "The 5-star army's reinforcements are coming. We can't fight them head-on. We have to retreat immediately." Perhaps Harbala was a general who cared about the big picture. He knew he couldn't do it, but he didn't do it. Or perhaps he was scared by the 5-star army. In the end, he gave the order to retreat. He gave up on the attack in front of him and left the 35,000 cavalry behind to cover the retreat of the army. "Commander, the enemy is escaping." A general of the Golden Armored Cavalry saw that Harbala was about to retreat and said anxiously, Wait. Is the radio station not ready yet?" This time, Wushugu didn't act rashly and shouted behind him. When he saw the reinforcements appear, he knew that it must be the work of the radio station that he looked down on. Considering that he had dismantled it after sending the report, he regretted it so much that his intestines were clear. If he had known that this thing had such a use, he would have definitely maintained contact with the outside world. Now, he was anxious to know what had happened outside and how many reinforcements had arrived. Should he take the initiative to attack, or should he bide his time? The radio operator in charge of communication had studied the system in Qiqian City before. He could be considered the only Han Chinese in the entire Meng 1st Military Division. In order to protect him, no matter how cruel the bloody battle was, they didn't let him charge with the army. Instead, they arranged for the Golden Armored Cavalry to protect him. This effort finally paid off. In a short time, the radio operator dug out the radio station hidden in the ground and connected it. Then, he received a telegram from the 5-star Army's main force. After the content was translated, the radio operator's expression still had a trace of nervousness. He quickly came to General Wushugu's side and said anxiously, "Commander, there is a telegram from above. It says that the reinforcements are only 3,000 cavalry. If there is a suitable opportunity, they hope that we can cooperate with them to break out of the encirclement." 3,000. Wushugu was shocked when he heard the answer. He then looked in the direction of the reinforcements in disbelief. Indeed, he saw banners fluttering in the wind and shadows everywhere. It didn't seem like 3,000 cavalry at all. However, since the radio station said so, he had no choice but to believe it. He couldn't help but feel relieved that he didn't order the army to charge. Fortunately, he didn't launch an attack. If he took the initiative to fight, the Timur cavalry would have to fight even if they didn't want to. Once they discovered that there were only 3,000 reinforcements, not only would he not be able to escape, even the 3,000 reinforcements would be surrounded and killed. Fortunately, he didn't make a wrong decision rashly. Then, Wushugu immediately led the army in the direction of the reinforcements. All the wounded soldiers were tied to the warhorses. Although the journey was still bumpy, it was fortunate that they were able to escape. In the past, when they followed the other kaganates, once they became wounded, they would be abandoned. They wouldn't be allowed to follow the army, let alone treat them. Just from this point alone, who knew how many people were envious of the 5-star Army's treatment of their soldiers? Among them were their own soldiers, but also their enemies. The reinforcements were the 3rd Legion's Nuzan Cavalry Division. They were personally led by Division Commander Yella. 3,000 cavalrymen brought out all the flags of the 3rd Legion in order to confuse and intimidate the enemy. In terms of horsemanship, the Nuzan Cavalry Division's soldiers were outstanding. Their soldiers could sleep on their horses and travel through the night without getting tired. As long as there were enough warhorses, they could create a miracle of speed. After learning that Meng Yishir was surrounded, Yang Qindong immediately thought of this Nuzhen cavalry division. He then ordered them to quickly provide reinforcements and requested division commander Wu Xing to cooperate fully. As a result, the 3,000 soldiers with the best horsemanship were selected. Each of them brought 4 horses and rushed over through the night with the flags of the entire army. After having a specific target, they didn't disappoint and arrived at the battlefield at the most crucial time. Naturally, the fact that Wu Shugu led his troops to fight to the death was inseparable from the fact that they were able to complete this mission. Therefore, when the 2 division commanders met, they immediately complimented each other. Division Commander Wu Shugu expressed his gratitude. Division Commander Yella expressed his admiration for Meng Yishir's fighting spirit. In the end, everyone was happy and the 2 armies met up and rushed back. This scene was finally witnessed by the dozens of Timur cavalry scouts who were following behind them. When they saw that the 5-star army's reinforcements were only 3,000 people, they were shocked and quickly reported this news to General Harbala. Originally, Harbala was glad that Meng Yishir didn't chase after him. Otherwise, he would have to sacrifice some of his cavalrymen. However, when he heard that the reinforcements were only 3,000 people, he was so angry that he fell off his horse. Before he fainted, he knew that he was going to die this time. If the number of reinforcements from the 5-star army was larger, General Mendu Latu might have thanked him for bringing back the main force of the army, and he might have been able to survive. But now, only 3,000 reinforcements were enough to scare his 80,000-strong army into fleeing. This was a mistake in his strategy. To put it bluntly, this was caused by his cowardly personality. Because of this, even if the general wanted to save his life, he wouldn't let him off this time for the sake of military discipline. Harbala's fainting caused them to lose all hope of chasing after the 5-star army. Although there were other generals in the army, they also had a certain amount of military power and could give orders. But who knew if this was a ploy by the 5-star army? Those 3,000 people were just there to confuse them. What if there were more reinforcements waiting for them? In any case, someone had already taken the blame for this failure. They only needed to retreat safely. Just like that, the 80,000 Timur cavalrymen quickly retreated. But what they didn't know was that in the sky, the 5-star army's air force was secretly monitoring their every move. Letting the air force deal with the fleeing Timur cavalrymen was still too weak. Their mission wasn't to attack from the air, but to keep an eye on these people and find where the Timur cavalry was resting. This would serve as a guide for the encirclement. This was naturally an order given by Yang Qindong himself. This time, Mendu Latu made the first move. With his personality, there was no reason for him to suffer a loss. The following counterattack was inevitable. Not only that, after Yang Qindong received Wu Shugu's farewell telegram, he sent a telegram to the 5-star army's new army to speed up and attack the Timur Empire's territory from the east. He was always the one who took the initiative to attack and set up traps. This time, he was actually tricked by the other party. Yang Qindong had to vent his anger no matter what. The commander of the new Third Army, Su He, rushed all the way here after receiving the order. He became the first 5-star army to arrive at Akamo City and successfully joined forces with the world's #1 cavalry army that had stayed behind to guard the city. These two armies that had been secretly competing with each other and comparing their military exploits all the time finally met. After Tianhu and Su He met, they couldn't help but punch each other's shoulders. This wasn't meant to fight, but rather a different way of showing respect and friendliness. The two strongest armies met. After some discussion, they joined forces and headed south from Akamo City. Their first target was the Kazan Khanate. First, it was to teach the other party a lesson. This Khanate had previously sent 20,000 cavalrymen with Hayfertel as its general to cause trouble for the world's first cavalry army. Second, once they occupied or controlled the Kazan Khanate, it would be the same as cutting off the Timur Empire's path to the eastern Khanates. Then, the Timur Empire would become a lone army, a piece of meat in the 5-star army's bowl. They could eat it whenever they wanted. Harbala finally woke up on the way back, but soon after, he returned to Herat City. Here, he met great General Mandaratu, and was beheaded in public for the crime of not advancing in fear of the enemy. Chapter 1520. The failure of the plan made Mandaratu feel great pressure. He had a bad feeling. This time, the Timur Empire was doomed. Even he wouldn't be able to turn the tide. The facts proved that his feeling was right. In the following period of time, bad news came one after another. First, they tried their best to get the internal troops to surrender, allowing the five-star army to finally have a safe path to attack. They split into two directions and attacked the Kazan Khanate to the east of the Timur Empire. The Kazan Khanate, which had already sent out troops to support, had a limited number of troops and could not stop the main force of the five-star army. In just half a month, the Ulu Khan followed the Baoli king and surrendered. Next, the hidden cavalry were suddenly surrounded by the five-star army on the west. These were the troops that had participated in the siege of Mangishur. Their tracks were tracked by the Yang faction's air force. Eventually, they found their foothold and besieged them. With their inferior military strength, it was only a matter of time before they were completely wiped out. Finally, the five-star army on the east brought over large amounts of grain and various military resources. They passed through the north of the Timur Empire and into the hands of the five-star army on the west. With this, Yang Qindong did not need to worry about grain. In other words, even if they couldn't get rid of the Timur Empire before winter arrived, they would have enough conditions and ability to survive. If they could not do it today, they would fight tomorrow. In short, they would not return until they destroyed the enemy. As more and more bad news came, the originally high-spirited General Mandulatu's hair turned white overnight. His expression also became much more haggard. All of this made Khan Amu extremely anxious. He had already received news that not only had the Ili Kingdom's King Bao lied and the Kazan Khanate surrendered to the five-star army, but even the Ilkhanate's Harsan Khan and the Norman Khanate's Saihan Khan had been captured by the five-star army. In other words, around the Timur Empire, other than the Crimean Khanate and a few small Khanates in the south, the other large factions of the alliance had already been destroyed by the five-star army. And all of this had only happened in a few months. Naturally, this was because the five-star army was strong and had advanced firearms. However, it was also because these people had weak resistance and did not usually rule the country. As a result, when danger came, civil strife occurred. For example, the Ili Kingdom's King Bao Lide had been persuaded by the previous Prime Minister Ali Pu. There was also the Ilkhanate's Harsan Khan who had misused Great General Alatang, and Wan Yanhong betrayed Janabek Khan, which directly led to the capture of their capital and the destruction of their Khanate. External enemies and internal troubles allowed the five-star army to achieve so many military exploits and achievements in such a short period of time. Now, the Timur Empire was besieged on all sides. How long could they last? Not only was Khan Amur muttering in his heart, the various nobles of the Khanate also had their own thoughts. It was to the extent that there were people who publicly announced that they would surrender to the five-star army. The civil strife that Khan Amur was most worried about had begun. This was enough to make him vigilant. He sent out a large number of palace guards to keep an eye on those nobles who wanted to surrender, and gave the order to kill them without mercy if things went wrong. Among these palace guards, there was no lack of children from various influential families. They were originally arranged by the Khan's side to show their unity. Now that these guards were used, there was no way the news wouldn't spread. Not long after, the news spread everywhere. This was clearly Khan Amur's intention. He didn't want to kill all of these nobles just because they wanted to surrender, so he gave them an appropriate warning. It had to be said that this move had some effect. At the very least, it suppressed the voices of those who wanted to surrender. On the surface, it looked like the entire Timur Empire was united. The five-star army pressed forward step by step. In order to prevent problems with the supply line at the rear from occurring, they adopted a steady approach. As a result, the time they took to advance became longer and longer. In the blink of an eye, it was already the 11th month of the year 1464. Heavy snow began to fall, completely cutting off the five-star army's path of advance. With the weather like this, it was impossible for humans to resist. Yang Qindong ordered the army to stop advancing, and began to consolidate their own territories. While recuperating, they were preparing for another battle in the coming year. At the same time, Yang Qindong also began to have ideas about the Timur Empire. This idea wasn't to use military force to solve everything, but to use literature to control military force. Wasn't Great Khan Amur always worried about the internal problems? Since he was afraid of this, then let's give him this. Yang Qindong sent out a large number of intelligence agents, and had them infiltrate Herat, the capital of the Timur Empire. He had them secretly contact those nobles who wanted to surrender. He also pointed out that it would be best to find some nobles who had a good relationship with Great General Mendelatu to persuade them. The reason why the Timur Empire was able to defend for so long, apart from the fact that their territory was too large, and that even the five-star army needed a lot of time to enter, was because of this wise and far-sighted Great General Mendelatu. This person was indeed worthy of being a great general of the Timur Empire, a famous general. The guerrilla tactics he used were mainly to harass the supply lines, and whenever he had the chance, he would besiege a small unit of the five-star army's cavalry. His actions had indeed brought a lot of trouble to the army's advance. If such a troublesome person could be dealt with, it would be equivalent to cutting off one of Khan Amur's arms. It would play a crucial role in taking down the Timur Empire in the coming year. This move was equivalent to a black tiger digging out the heart. If it succeeded, it would be extremely beneficial to the five-star army. However, the problem was that Mendelatu had a very cautious personality. Whether it was assassination or picking out a person's flaws, it wasn't an easy task. Since they couldn't find any flaws in the person himself, then they would start from the people around him. They would make full use of Khan Amur's suspicious personality and make him take the initiative to suspect Mendelatu. As long as this great Khan really did so, without Mendelatu's command, the Timur Empire's cavalry would be like a tiger without teeth, and would no longer be a threat. At the same time, Yang Qindong ordered the formation of layers of encirclement around the Timur Empire, giving people the impression that as long as the weather permitted, the army would be able to destroy the Timur Empire at any time. In this way, under the pressure from the outside, there would be no need to worry about the enemy not attacking. Those who surrendered would definitely jump out. At that time, even if Mendelatu was innocent, he would be dragged down. 1464 AD, the year of the destruction of the Khaganate in the historical records. It was precisely under the leadership of Yang Qindong that the five-star army achieved victory in the east and west, causing some small Khaganates and small factions to surrender. Not only did they expand Yangtze's territory, they also directly dealt with the last threat outside the Ming dynasty. It was not accurate to say that it was the last one, because when Yang Qindong and the Timur Empire were caught in a bitter battle, Bangra, that is, Bangladesh, to the west of Burma, suddenly sent troops to invade, resulting in the loss of 4 counties and 3 cities, 120,000 people were captured, and tens of thousands of houses were burned down. When this matter was reported to Yang Qindong, the five-star army nearby had already sent troops to rescue. Not only did the Myanmar army, the Laos army, the Vietnamese army, and the Cambodian army all moved out, even the Cold Front 1st Regiment that was patrolling nearby quickly rushed over. Although the 1st Regiment led by Bu Hai only had 2,000 people, they were a fully armed army. With them as the main force, and with the help of several local military regions, they were able to stop Bangla's army from entering. However, because the number of cavalry in the local army was very small, they could only defend against the enemy's mobile army. Yang Qindong took the telegram sent by the Navy the day before yesterday and found a piece of relevant information. He ordered, "Isn't Long Yuntian of the 3rd Marine Division sending supplies from Sumatra? Let them take a detour into the Bay of Bengal and attack Chittagong for me. Create a situation where the army is pressuring the border and force their cavalry to retreat." Yes. Wang Shan, the head of the telecommunications department, took a pen and wrote down the order, then turned and went to the telegraph room. Beta Persei was left on the side with a pair of tiger-like eyes spewing out flames of anger. "Young master, let me take 10,000 cavalry and kill them. How can a small Bangla overturn the sky? Just from Beta Persei's request for 10,000 troops, it was obvious that he didn't take the other party seriously. But Yang Qindong didn't think so. Today's Yang Xie's momentum was so great that he even destroyed an old force like the Golden Horde. Logically speaking, no one would take the initiative to find trouble with him. But anyone who dares to do this must have something to rely on. And before he fully understands what's going on, he won't have any thoughts of underestimating the enemy. Seeing that Yang Qindong didn't agree to his request, Beta Persei had to take a step back and said, "Young master, the new 5th Army, the Yi First Army, and the Yi Second Army on the Eastern Front have all asked for battle. Why don't you just send an army to Bangla to ask for an explanation?" "No. Now the main task is to clean up the Timur Empire. Other things can be put aside for the time being. Send a telegram to them, no one can act rashly without a military order." Yang Qindong shook his head again. At this moment, his eyes were incomparably deep, and if one looked carefully, they would reveal a murderous intent. Bangla's offensive behavior made him angry. He will remember this account first. After the Timur Empire is dealt with in the spring of next year, he will have the time to deal with them. Previously, he also considered that Bangla and the Southern Ming Empire were neighbors. If he attacked them, it would bring too much pressure to the Southern Ming Empire. After all, he had too many enemies before, and he didn't have the intention to attack the Southern Ming Empire.